Welcome, welcome. You're here at Harryverse X. Today we present to you, what if Loki and Hela found Harry at age 5 and Asgardian siblings raised god of mischief, death and magic together. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Cosmos. The smell hit Loki first. It wasn't the Midgardian street with its clipped hedges and identical houses and the particular brand of human desperation that disguised itself as respectability. It wasn't the exhaust from the cars or the chemical sweetness drifting from someone's open kitchen window 3 doors down. It was something underneath all of that, something sharp and metallic and wrong, the smell of old fear concentrated into a very small space. He stood on the pavement outside number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and tilted his head the way he did when a puzzle had pieces that didn't fit the picture on the box. "You feel that," he said. It wasn't a question. Hela was leaning against the garden wall with her arms crossed and her expression set to the particular shade of contempt she reserved for things that wasted her time. She had been in the middle of something when Loki had pulled her through the Bifrost, something she would not specify and he had learned not to ask about, and her patience was a rope that had been fraying for the past 20 minutes. "I feel a great many things," she said. "Most of them are irritation. The magic." He gestured vaguely at the house. "There's a child in there. And the magic around them is uncontrolled." She uncrossed her arms. Her tone had shifted, barely, but Loki caught it. "Frightened." Frightened is an understatement. He turned to look at the house properly now. It was aggressively ordinary. A burgundy car in the driveway. Flower boxes in the windows. A little plaque beside the door that said the Dursleys in curling script, as though the name itself deserved announcement. "Something in that house is in pain, Hela. Real pain. And whatever it is, it's been sitting in that pain for a very long time." She was already walking toward the front door. "Hela." He fell into step beside her. "We can't simply, watch me." She didn't knock. The door opened anyway, not because she touched it, but because doors, in Hela's experience, had the good sense to get out of her way. The lock stuttered and clicked and swung wide, and the inside of number 4, Privet Drive exhaled into the evening air with a smell of boiled cabbage and carpet cleaner and something else that made Loki's jaw tighten. The entrance hall was aggressively normal. Coat hooks. A row of shoes. A framed photograph of an enormous blonde boy who looked like someone had drawn a child by committee. Stairs leading up, carpeted in beige. And beneath the stairs, beneath them, set into the wall like an afterthought, like a door someone had tried to hide by making it too small to notice, a latch. Padlocked. They both stopped. The magic was coming from there. It pulsed in irregular waves the way a heartbeat does when the body attached to it has been frightened for too long, not one sharp spike of panic but a constant, exhausted thrumming that had worn itself nearly smooth. Loki had felt sear like this before, in old places where magic had been trapped and never given room to breathe. He had never felt it in something living. He crouched down in front of the small door and looked at the padlock and thought, very clearly, several things he chose not to say aloud because Hela was already radiating the kind of cold fury that preceded significant property damage. "Open it," she said. He did. The lock dissolved like it had never existed, and the door swung open, and the darkness inside the cupboard under the stairs breathed out at them, and Loki looked in. The boy was small. Even for 5, he was small, the kind of small that came from not being fed properly, from being given the structural minimum and nothing else. He was sitting in the far corner with his knees drawn up to his chest, wearing clothes that were 3 sizes too big for him, and his hair was black and absolutely chaotic, sticking up in 17 directions like it had opinions about gravity. He had a bruise on his left cheekbone. He had another one on his wrist, visible where the overlarge sleeve had slipped down. His eyes, when he opened them, were green. Not the pale, interesting green of someone's carefully noted eye color. Deeply, impossibly, furiously green, like something that had never decided to be one thing and had landed on the most vivid option available. They blinked at Loki in the dark, not afraid, or rather, not newly afraid, with the careful blankness of a child who had learned that showing anything tended to make things worse. "Hello," Loki said. He kept his voice quiet and level, the tone he used when he wanted something to come closer rather than bolt. "What's your name?" The boy looked at him for a moment. Then he looked past him, presumably at Hela, and whatever expression he found there made him blink once more. "Harry," he said. His voice was hoarse. It sounded like he hadn't used it in a while. "Harry Potter." "Hello, Harry Potter." Loki sat back on his heels and did not reach in or loom or do any of the things that would have made the boy press further into the corner. "How long have you been in here?" Harry thought about it with the solemn seriousness of a child doing actual arithmetic. "Since yesterday," he said. "Or the day before. It gets hard to count." Something in Loki's chest did something he didn't give it permission to do. He kept his face pleasant and calm. "Are you hungry?" "Yes." "Are you hurt?" Harry looked down at his wrist. "Back up. A bit. Can I help you out of there?" The boy considered him for another moment, really looked at him, with those impossible green eyes, with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to read people the way others read weather. Whatever he saw, he apparently decided was acceptable. He unfolded himself from the corner and crawled to the door and accepted Loki's offered hand and climbed out of the cupboard under the stairs, and stood in the entrance hall of number 4, Privet Drive, and looked up at the two people in front of him. He was so small. Hela looked down at him, and Harry looked up at her, and the silence between them was not the silence of strangers but something stranger, recognition, maybe, though that made no logical sense. Hela's expression was doing something Loki hadn't seen it do in a very long time. Not softening, exactly. She didn't soften. But something in it had decided. "You have a bruise," she said. "Yes," said Harry. "Who gave it to you?" "My uncle." He said it without particular emotion, the way you stated a fact that had simply become part of the furniture of your life. "And my aunt, sometimes." "Not as much." Hela looked at Loki. Loki looked at Hela. Several years of sibling communication passed between them in approximately 2 seconds, and then Hela looked back down at Harry and said, "You're coming with us." "Where?" said Harry. "Somewhere with better accommodations," said Loki. Harry looked around the entrance hall, at the padlocked cupboard door swinging open behind him, at the framed photographs of the Desley family in which he did not appear once, at the carefully maintained ordinariness of a household that had arranged itself entirely around his absence. "All right," he said. Vernon Desley came downstairs 17 minutes later to find the front door standing open and the cupboard empty and 2 footprints, one very small, 2 very large, visible in the carpet pile in a way that the vacuum would sort out in the morning. He stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment. Then he went to the kitchen and poured himself a large glass of water and drank it very slowly, and when Petunia called down to ask what was the matter, he said, "Nothing," and believed it by morning. Some part of the human brain, when confronted with the genuinely impossible, chooses forgetting as a survival mechanism. Vernon Desley's brain was particularly good at this. It had been practicing for years. The Bifrost was not something Harry screamed at. This was the first unusual thing. Most Midgardian children, in Loki's limited experience of transporting them across dimensions, which admittedly was not extensive, this being the first time he'd done it, reacted to the Rainbow Bridge with a combination of terror and sensory overload that required significant management. Harry stood between them as the light tore open the sky and swallowed them whole, and he looked at the streaming colors, at the impossible geometry of the cosmos unfolding around them in every direction, at the stars that were not points of light from this angle but whole burning things with weight and presence, and his mouth opened. Not in a scream. In wonder. "Oh," he breathed. And the magic in him, that wild, frightened, trapped heartbeat of power that had been pulsing in exhausted cycles since they'd found him, suddenly expanded. Not explosively. Like something finally given enough room. Like a fist unclenching after years of holding on. It reached out in every direction, tentative and enormous at the same time, brushing against the fabric of the Bifrost, and the Bifrost, which was ancient and indifferent and answered to nothing that was not Asgardian or Allfather-blessed, shivered. Loki felt it happen and turned to look at Harry in the streaming light, and what he saw on the boy's face was not a child overwhelmed. It was a child recognizing something. Home, maybe. Or the shape of a thing he'd always known was there but never been able to see. "You felt this before," Loki said. Harry looked at him with those green eyes full of Bifrost light. "Not like this," he said. "But sort of like this. When I'm angry, or scared. Things happen. I know. Are you scared of it?" "No," said Loki, and meant it absolutely. Harry seemed to think about this. Then he turned back to the streaming cosmos and watched it with complete, serious attention for the rest of the journey, like a student who had finally found the right classroom. Heimdall did not comment when they arrived. This was unusual. Heimdall commented on everything. It was his particular gift and his most consistent personality trait, the ability to observe the entire universe and choose, with surgical precision, the observation most likely to be useful or uncomfortable. He stood at the end of the Bifrost bridge with his golden eyes and his absolute stillness, and he looked at Harry for a long moment, and Harry looked back, and then Heimdall stepped aside. "Welcome to Asgard," he said, and his voice had something in it that Loki couldn't quite name. Harry stepped onto the bridge and looked at Asgard spread out before him in the evening gold, the palace gleaming at the end of the bridge like it had been placed there specifically to make people doubt themselves, the waterfall pouring off the edge of the world into forever, the city warm with light and the sounds of something vast and alive and old, and he was quiet for a long time. "Is this real?" he finally asked. "As real as anything," said Loki. "Do people live here?" "Thousands of them." "Are they all like you?" "No one is like us," said Hela, and she said it as a simple statement of fact, and Harry seemed to file this away under useful information without argument. They walked him through the outer palace corridors, not the main routes. Loki was careful about that, choosing the servants' paths and the back ways that meant fewer staring faces, and Harry walked between them and looked at everything with that serious, measuring attention that seemed to be his default mode. He didn't ask why the torches burned different colors. He didn't ask about the armor on the walls or the murals depicting battles in gold and umber. He looked at everything, catalogued it, and held his questions until he had enough information to ask the right ones. Smart, then. Quietly, carefully smart, in the way of children who had learned that the wrong question at the wrong time had consequences. The chambers Loki used were not the grandest in the palace. He had never particularly wanted the grandest, he wanted the ones with the best library access and the most defensible secondary exits, which was an architectural preference that said more about him than most people appreciated. There was a sitting room and 2 bedrooms and a library that had eaten into what had been intended as a 3rd bedroom, and a bathroom with plumbing that operated on principles that were mostly Asgardian with several refinements Loki had added over the centuries. He opened the door and ushered Harry inside. Harry stood in the sitting room and looked at the shelves of books climbing every available wall, at the fire burning low in the grate, at the furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive, and the tight, careful blankness in his face did something complicated. His lower lip moved, barely, then steadied. "Is this yours?" he asked. "Yes. It's very nice. Thank you." "I can sleep on the floor," Harry said. "I don't need a bed." I don't want to be any trouble." The way he said it, quickly, preemptively, the words arriving already worn smooth from use, told Loki everything he needed to know about how this boy had learned to survive. He crouched down so they were at eye level. "Harry. Look at me." He waited until the green eyes found his. "You are not trouble. You are a child and you are going to sleep in a bed and be given food and you will not apologize for either of those things. Do you understand?" Harry stared at him. "Why?" he said finally. "Why what? Why are you being nice to me?" It was the most honest question Loki had been asked in decades. He held it for a moment, turning it over, deciding against any version of the answer that was comfortable or flattering. Because I know what it is to be put in a small box by people who should have known better, he said. And because your magic is extraordinary and you have no idea what you are yet. And because, he added, almost as an afterthought that wasn't an afterthought at all, someone ought to. Hela appeared in the doorway behind him. The child needs food, she announced. I've had it sent. And a bath. She looked at Harry's oversized clothes with an expression of specific displeasure. And new clothes. Those are offensive. Harry looked down at his clothes and then up at Hela and then, for the first time, his face did something it probably hadn't done in a while. The corner of his mouth twitched. They were my cousins, he said. Your cousin should be ashamed of himself, said Hela. He's bigger than me. That is not an excuse. She said this with such absolute conviction that Harry actually laughed, a small, startled sound, like he'd surprised himself, and then looked immediately guilty about it, like laughing was something that required permission. Loki made a note of that too. He ate 3 bowls of the thick barley soup the palace kitchen sent up, and then half a loaf of bread with butter and honey, and then a piece of apple cake that he worked through with the slow, methodical pleasure of someone who had been hungry long enough that fullness was a new experience to be properly appreciated. He ate without speaking, which Loki respected, and when he was done he sat back in the chair and looked slightly dazed. Thank you, he said to no one in particular. You're welcome, said Hela, and she said it like she meant it, which from Hela was practically a soliloquy. Loki conjured a set of sleeping clothes in the right size, or near enough. He was working from estimation, and showed Harry to the smaller bedroom off the sitting room, which had a bed with an actual mattress and actual blankets and actual pillows, plural, which Harry looked at for a moment too long before he looked away. I'll be in the next room, Loki said. Hela is just down the hall. If you need anything, I won't, Harry said quickly. You might, Loki said pleasantly. And that's fine. He pulled the door mostly shut and went back to the sitting room where Hela was standing by the fire with her arms folded, staring into the flames with the particular expression she wore when she was doing her actual thinking. He's been in that cupboard more than once, she said. Yes. For how long, do you think? Long enough for it to feel normal. Loki sat down and stretched his legs out and looked at the ceiling. His magic is, Hela, you felt it on the Bifrost. It isn't seer. It's something else. Something older. Something Midgardian. Something that pre-exists Midgard, maybe. He ran a hand through his hair. I've been studying old magic for 500 years. I have never felt anything quite like it. It's as if the magic itself is alive. Independently. Like it has a will. Hela was quiet for a moment. What do we do with him, she said finally, and her voice was carefully neutral in a way that meant she already had an opinion and was waiting to see if he matched it. Keep him, said Loki. A pause. Odin won't like it, said Hela. Odin doesn't like much of anything. He tilted his head to look at her. But even Odin cannot argue that a Midgardian child being starved in a cupboard is preferable to, he gestured vaguely at the room, the palace, the existence they were currently offering. This. Odin can argue anything, said Hela. He's had practice. Well. Loki smiled, and it was the smile that meant he'd been thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else since before the current problem arrived. Then we won't ask him. Not tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'll have had time to compose a better argument. He paused. Go to sleep, Hela. I don't sleep, he said. You can loom threateningly at the Allfather much more effectively when you're rested. She gave him a look that could have stripped paint and went to her own chambers, and Loki sat in the firelight for a while and thought about small green eyes and magic that recognized the shape of the cosmos and a boy who had apologized for needing a bed. He heard it after perhaps an hour, small, quiet, the sound of someone not sleeping in an unfamiliar place. He got up without thinking about it and opened the bedroom door and looked in. Harry was sitting up in the bed with his knees to his chest and his eyes open and the magic around him moving in slow, troubled pulses like a storm that hadn't decided where to strike. "Can't sleep?" Loki said. "No," said Harry. Loki came in and sat on the end of the bed. "What's wrong?" "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Harry said. "In the cupboard." And all of this, he looked at the room, the blankets, the window with Asgard glowing outside it. "I'll wake up and it won't be real." "That," said Loki carefully, "is a reasonable fear to have had it happen to you before. Good things becoming not real." Harry looked at him. "Has it happened to you? Once or twice?" He leaned back against the headboard beside Harry and looked at the ceiling. "What I have found useful, in those moments, is to find the one specific detail that couldn't be dreamed. Something too specific, too strange, too real for a dream to have generated." Harry thought about this. "Like what?" "In your case," Loki glanced sideways at him. "Did you know that the fire in the sitting room is burning blue? It's blue. Deep blue, with green at the very center. I changed it years ago." Odin was annoyed. The All-Father is quite conservative about the correct color of fire and has opinions about it. He paused. "You couldn't have dreamed that. You didn't know it. So this moment, with its specific blue and green fire that you're only learning about right now, is new information. And new information is, by definition, real." Harry was quiet for a while. Then, "How do you know so much?" "I read a great deal," said Loki. "And I pay attention to things people generally don't bother paying attention to. It's a useful habit." "The woman," Harry said carefully. "The scary one. Hela. Is she angry at me?" "No." He paused. "Hela is angry at a lot of things, but not you." "She is," he searched for the honest version. "She is protective in a way that looks angry if you don't know how to read it. Think of it as a language that uses sharp edges instead of soft ones." Harry appeared to be considering this. "She has very frightening eyes," he said. "She does," Loki agreed. "Most things find her frightening. She considers it a courtesy, if everything is already afraid of her, she doesn't have to do the work of inspiring it." Harry made the small surprised laugh sound again, and this time he didn't try to pull it back. He yawned afterward, jaw cracking, and blinked at the window. "Are you going to make me go back?" he asked. Very quiet. "No," said Loki. "Promise?" He looked at the boy, at this small, underfed, furiously alive creature who had climbed out of a locked cupboard and looked at the cosmos and said, "Oh," and said, "I give you my word." Which, despite what some people will tell you about me, is not a thing I extend carelessly. Harry looked at him for a long moment with those green eyes. "Okay," he said. And went to sleep. Morning on Asgard arrived the way it always did, suddenly, completely, with the golden light crashing through every window like it had somewhere important to be. Loki had slept in a chair in the corner of the bedroom, which he would deny doing if anyone asked, and was awake before Harry and had arranged for breakfast to be sent and was back in his chair with a book open on his knee when Harry woke up. Harry opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling and said nothing for about 30 seconds. Then he turned his head and found Loki there and said, "You stayed." "I fell asleep in the chair," Loki said without looking up from his book. "Entirely by accident." "Right," said Harry, with the tone of someone who was 5 years old and already had a sophisticated understanding of when adults were lying in the kind way. Hela arrived 20 minutes later while Harry was working his way through a breakfast that would have adequately fed a moderately sized Asgardian warrior, sat down across from him, and watched him eat with the focused attention of someone assessing a new acquisition. "How old are you?" she said. 5, said Harry, through toast. "Do you know any magic?" "Deliberately, I mean." "No." He considered. "Things happen sometimes. When I'm scared. Or angry." "What kind of things?" "Glass broke once," he said. "When Dudley was chasing me." There was a window and it just broke between us. He stopped chasing me. He paused. And one time I was on the roof. I don't know how I got there. I was trying to get away from Dudley and I was running and then I wasn't on the ground anymore. He looked at his hands. Is that magic? That is rather impressive magic, said Loki. Is it bad? No, said Hela. It is your power defending you when you could not defend yourself. That is exactly what power should do. Harry looked at her with an expression that was carefully not relieved, in the way of people who have been relieved before and got hurt for it. Are you going to teach me? He asked. Yes, said Hela, and she said it like a contract. Both of us are. And you will learn everything. You will not hide it, not suppress it, not make yourself small to accommodate people who are uncomfortable with what you are. She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes were very serious. Are we understood? Yes, said Harry. He sat up a little straighter. Good. She stood up. Finish your breakfast. Odin received them in the early afternoon, in the smaller throne room, which was only slightly less intimidating than the main one, the same gold, the same height, the same sense of a space designed specifically to make visitors feel the proper weight of their own insignificance. He sat on the throne with the Gungnir across his knees and one eye that saw everything and the particular stillness of a man who had ruled long enough that patience had become his primary weapon. He looked at Harry for a long time. Harry looked back. There was something in how the boy held himself that stopped Loki in the middle of his carefully prepared argument. Harry didn't flinch. He didn't shrink back, didn't hide behind Loki's coat, didn't duck his eyes to the floor the way you'd expect from a 5-year-old standing before the king of Asgard who had the gravity of centuries sitting on him like a physical weight. He just looked back. Green eyes steady. Not defiant, not performing bravery. Simply present and unimpressed. Odin's eye moved to Loki. Explain, the All-Father said. He was being kept in, I know where he was being kept, said Odin. Loki stopped. The All-Father knew everything, of course, and had apparently known about this particular situation and made the particular calculation that it was not his concern. I am asking why he is here. Because we brought him, said Hela. That much is apparent. Odin's eye moved back to Harry. Boy. What is your name? Harry, said Harry. Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Something shifted in the All-Father's face, barely, less than most people would have caught, but Loki caught it. Recognition. Controlled. Complicated. Do you know what this place is? Asgard, said Harry. Loki told me. Do you know what they are? He indicated Loki and Hela. Harry glanced between them. I think so. Loki is a god of mischief. And I don't know exactly what Hela is, but I think she might be in charge of, he paused, choosing his words with that careful precision. Death, maybe? Goddess of death, said Hela, without expression. Right, said Harry. So, the goddess of death and the god of mischief. They found me in a cupboard. A pause. That seems quite unlikely. Odin looked at him. There was something in that look that Loki couldn't quite read, it happened so rarely that it felt significant. Unlikely things have a habit of finding each other, the All-Father said. Father, Loki started. He will stay, said Odin. Complete silence. He will stay, the All-Father repeated, for now. He will be housed in your chambers, Loki. He will not be presented at court until his nature is better understood. He will not be formally recognized until I have, another of those fractional pauses. Until I have considered the full implications. And if we disagree with your timeline, said Hela. Odin looked at his daughter. Then you will disagree with it quietly and within palace walls, he said. As you generally do. Hela's jaw tightened. But she didn't argue. Not because she was conceding, anyone who knew her understood she wasn't conceding anything, but because she was choosing her battlefield, and this one, today, wasn't the right one. "Thank you," said Loki carefully. Odin waved a hand in dismissal, and as they turned to leave, Loki heard the All-Father say, very quietly, almost to himself, "I wondered when this day would come." He didn't turn back. He filed it away, alongside the recognition he'd caught earlier and the fact that Odin had clearly known about Harry's existence in advance and the strange conviction, growing since the Bifrost, that nothing about today was as accidental as it appeared. He walked his brother in magic and his goddess sister and his new, bewildering, green-eyed charge back through the palace corridors, and thought, "What are you, Harry Potter, that even the All-Father looks at you with his careful eyes?" That evening, when Harry had been settled again and the palace had quieted to its nighttime rhythms, Loki pulled the oldest book in his library from its shelf. It was not a book most people knew about. It was not a book he'd acquired through the palace's official collection. He'd taken it from a ruined tower on the edge of the realm the scholars called Nornheim, 3 centuries ago, after he'd translated enough of the inscription on the outside to understand that it concerned a particular type of magic, older than Seer, older than the Yggdrasil as a theoretical framework, old enough that the language in which it was written had no surviving speakers. He had been working on it, on and off, for 300 years. He opened it to the section he'd been deciphering for the last decade and read the passage again that he had partially translated and only half understood until tonight. The translation, as best he'd managed it, ran, "From the space between the living and the dead, between intention and result, between the word and the world it names, there will arise a working. Not a creature of this design or that one. Not Asgardian, not Vanir, not bound to any single realm's understanding of what magic is. A confluence. The point where all channels of power meet and become something with a will of its own. It will wear the face of whatever vessel first calls it into being, and it will come into the world in a body that cannot contain it comfortably, and it will require teaching, not about power, for the power requires no teaching, but about what power is for." He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he looked toward the hallway that led to the bedroom where Harry was sleeping, with Asgard's nighttime gold coming through the window and his impossible magic settling for the first time in his life into something like stillness. "What are you?" he said softly, to the empty room. The fire in the grate, deep blue with green at the center, crackled once, warmly, almost like an answer. Hela appeared in the doorway with a cup of something steaming and looked at him sitting there with the ancient book open on his knee and the expression on his face that she probably hadn't seen since they were young. "Loki," she said. "I need to do more research." "Obviously." She came in and sat down. "What did the book say?" He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was how you knew Hela considered something worth paying attention to. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. "A confluence," she said. "My best translation. The word in the original is closer to something like, the place where rivers meet, but the rivers are all of magic, all of it, every type from every realm. And it wears the face of whatever vessel called it into being." She tilted her head. "So whoever made Harry, or whatever made Harry," said Loki, "was trying to create something specific. Something that required 2 people who specialize in mischief and death to find it in a cupboard in Surrey. Apparently." Hela looked at her cup. "He's a child, Loki. I know. Whatever he is, whatever he was made to be, he is currently 5 years old and he thinks he needs to sleep on the floor so as not to be trouble. I know. Whatever comes later," she looked up. "Whatever the book says, whatever Odin's careful face was about, right now, what he needs is to not be in a cupboard. That comes first." "I agree completely." A pause. "He called me scary," she said. "He said frightening," said Loki. "Specifically, he said you had very frightening eyes." She considered this. "Good," she said, and it sounded almost fond. "He should be paying attention." Loki smiled. "He is." He looked at the book again. "He pays extraordinary attention. Did you see how he looked at Odin? Not frightened. Assessing. He was assessing the All-Father the way a field commander assesses terrain. He's 5. He's remarkable. Yes, said Hela simply. He is. They sat in the firelight for a while without talking, which was something only people who had known each other very long could do comfortably, and the palace settled around them into nighttime quiet, and down the hall, Harry Potter, who was possibly the oldest kind of magic in any form the 9 realms had seen in an age, slept peacefully in an actual bed for the first time in his life, with Asgard burning gold outside his window. In the morning, Hela would begin teaching him how to stand. In the morning, Loki would begin teaching him how to think. Tonight, though, the most important thing was the sleeping, and the food already arranged for breakfast, and the fact that the fire was blue-green and he knew it now and could come back to it if the dreams got bad and needed to be proved wrong. Real things left specific details. And this, all of this, was very, very real. Chapter 2, What Gods Teach Their Children. 6 years passed the way significant years do, not in a blur, exactly, but in a series of moments so vivid and particular that when you tried to arrange them into a sequence afterward, you found they resisted. They stacked instead, layer on layer, each one changing the shape of the thing underneath it. Harry grew. Not just upward, though that happened too. He was still lean, still built for speed rather than mass, with his father's black hair that refused to cooperate with gravity and his mother's eyes and a face that had settled, around age 9, into something that made people in palace corridors stop and look twice without quite knowing why. He grew in the way that mattered more, the way that couldn't be measured in doorframe marks. He grew into himself. It happened in the training yard at dawn, twice a week, with Hela standing over him holding a practice sword and not making concessions for the fact that she outweighed him by several hundred years of combat instinct. It happened in the library in the afternoons, with Loki sitting across from him at the big table, walking him through the mechanics of seer with the patience of someone who had never found patience easy and had learned it specifically for this purpose. It happened in the evenings when they ate together in Loki's chambers and argued about everything, history, strategy, the correct interpretation of the 4th canto of the Eddic verses, whether a feint was more valuable than a genuine attack when your opponent was expecting deception, and Harry held his own with increasing frequency and absolutely no apology for it. Hela noticed it first, because Hela noticed everything. Around his 9th birthday she paused in the middle of a sparring session and looked at him properly, the way she looked at things she was recalibrating, and said, "You pulled that last sequence. I saw you check the power before you committed to it." Harry lowered his practice blade. "You're faster when I push harder," he said. "You compensate differently." I wanted to see the compensation. She stared at him. "You're studying me. You told me to study my opponent before I try to beat them," he said, with the reasonable tone of someone pointing out that they had simply done the homework. "I meant before the fight, not during it. Why would I limit the observation period?" Hela looked at him for a long moment and then looked at Loki, who was watching from the wall with the book he was theoretically reading closed in his lap and the expression of someone trying very hard not to look smug. "He's doing it to you too," she said. "I know," said Loki. "He figured out my tells in seer about 6 months ago and has been using them to misdirect me during our practice sessions. I only realized last week." Harry said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. "Wipe that expression off your face," said Hela. "I don't have an expression," said Harry. "That's the expression," said Hela. He couldn't quite suppress the smile fast enough. She hit him in the shoulder with the flat of her practice blade, not hard, but with the casual precision of someone who had been swatting talented students for centuries, and reset her stance. "Again," she said. "And this time, stop studying and commit." "But, there is no but. Information gathering has a point where it becomes delay. Commit." He committed. It was, Loki thought, watching from the wall, genuinely extraordinary. Not just for an 11-year-old. Extraordinary in absolute terms. The way Harry moved when he stopped holding anything back had a quality that was hard to describe without resorting to language that sounded like flattery and was actually just observation. Like water deciding on its direction. Like something that had always known exactly what it was and had simply been waiting for enough space to demonstrate it. Hela disarmed him 3 times. He disarmed her once, on the 4th exchange, inside an hour, which was the first time in Harry's training life that he'd managed it, and she caught the blade as it spun away and looked at it in her hand and then looked at him, and she was breathing slightly harder than she usually did. "Good," she said. For Hela, that was a standing ovation. The magic was the stranger story. Seer, in its traditional Asgardian form, was a discipline, structured, architectural, built on a foundation of understanding the fundamental resonances of matter and energy and learning to redirect them with enough precision that the universe did what you wanted without technically being forced. It took centuries for most Asgardians to develop meaningful control. Thor, for all his power, had never particularly bothered with it. Even Loki, who was, by any objective measure, the most gifted seer practitioner in Asgard's living history, had needed decades to move from instinct to mastery. Harry managed the basic structural forms in 4 months. Not because Loki was an extraordinary teacher, though he was. Not because Harry was trying unusually hard, though he was that too. But because, as they both gradually understood, Harry wasn't learning seer so much as he was learning Loki's language for something he already knew how to do. The magic was already there. It had always been there, the wild, frightened heartbeat of power that had shattered glass and put him on rooftops as a terrified 5-year-old had been, all along, the instinctive expression of something that required no instruction to exist. Loki was not teaching Harry to use magic. He was teaching Harry to speak to it. To have a conversation instead of a collision. Around age 8, Harry stopped needing the frameworks entirely. "You're not using the structural forms," Loki said one afternoon, watching Harry move through a complex sequence that should have required the full architectural scaffolding of intermediate seer practice. "No," said Harry, not stopping. "How are you doing it, then?" Harry paused and thought about this with his head slightly tilted, the look he got when he was trying to translate an internal experience into external language. "It's more like," he held out his hand and a small flame appeared in his palm, blue-white, nothing like fire, more like concentrated intention. "It's more like asking than building. The building felt like I was constructing a thing and hoping the magic would agree to live in it. This feels more like, the magic already knows what I want and I'm just confirming." Loki looked at the flame in Harry's palm. It was not seer. It was not anything he had taught. It was that older thing, the thing from the book he'd been deciphering for 11 years now, the thing that had no single name in any language he'd found. It moved with a quality of awareness, not intelligence, exactly, but intention, that made even Loki, who was not easily impressed by manifestations of power, pay close attention. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Not clinically. Genuinely." Harry considered. "Like the space between words," he said. "Like, when you know what you're going to say but haven't said it yet. That space. The magic lives in that space, I think. And everything else lives in words. And I can reach into both places at the same time." Loki sat back. "What?" said Harry. "Nothing." He picked up his book. "I want you to try something. I want you to hold that flame and simultaneously run the third illusion framework, not instead of what you're doing, alongside it." Harry looked at the flame in his palm and after a moment the air beside it shimmered and produced a convincing replica of the flame 3 feet away, same light, same heat, the kind of illusion that would fool most Asgardian warriors in a combat situation. The original flame continued unchanged. "Split focus," said Harry. "That's what you're testing. You want to know if I can run both systems simultaneously." He looked at the illusion. "I can run more than 2 if you want to see." "Show me." For more flames appeared in the air around the room, each one separate, each one slightly different, different colors, different intensities, one that cast no shadow, one that gave off cold instead of heat. The original remained in his palm. Harry stood in the center of all of it with his eyes half closed and the expression of someone listening to music no one else could hear. Loki watched all of this and thought about the passage in the ancient book about the point where all channels of magic meet and become something with a will of its own. That's enough, he said. Harry let it all go at once. The flames vanished cleanly, no dissipation, no residual shimmer. Just, gone. Am I doing it wrong? Harry asked. No. Loki set his book down and looked at him seriously. Harry. I want you to understand something, and I want you to actually hear it rather than nodding and filing it away to process later the way you generally do. Harry straightened slightly. I'm listening. What you can do is not normal. Not by Asgardian standards. Not by any standard I have reference for. He paused. That is not a problem. It is not something to be concerned about or managed or made smaller so that it fits into an existing category. It is simply what you are. And the most important thing you will ever learn, more important than any specific ability or technique, is that you don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Harry was quiet for a moment. Hela says that too, he said. Hela is consistently right, said Loki. Write it down somewhere. She'd be insufferable if she knew you said that. She already knows it, said Loki. She simply enjoys having it confirmed. The assassin arrived on a Thursday. This was the kind of specific detail that seemed irrelevant until later, when you were reviewing the sequence of events and realized that Thursday was the day Harry trained alone in the outer yard while Loki was in a council meeting he couldn't escape and Hela was on the other side of the palace dealing with something related to Niflheim that she'd been deliberately vague about. The assassin was Frost Giant, or half, at least, big enough to make the Asgardian guards at the outer gate seem like a reasonable comparison but not so large that he couldn't move through palace corridors without attracting immediate attention. He had done his research. He came in through the water gate at the palace's east side, which was technically guarded but in practice was used infrequently enough that the guards maintained the kind of alert level that was theoretically appropriate rather than operationally useful. He had a blade that Loki, if he'd seen it, would have recognized as Nornheim forged, which meant it was built to disrupt magical defense as well as physical armor. He had clearly done significant research on Harry specifically. He knew where Harry trained. He knew the Thursday schedule. He knew that the outer yard, this particular morning, would have Harry alone and whatever Asgardian escort was required by palace protocol since Harry was not officially recognized, which in practice meant one guard standing at the far gate trying to look attentive. What the assassin apparently had not done was watch Harry train for more than a few minutes. Harry was in the middle of a sequence Hela had designed specifically for multiple opponents, not a practice form, but a genuine combat sequence, moving in 3 dimensions, using the yard's architectural features the way a good fighter used terrain. He was running it at approximately 3/4 speed as a warm-up. He had his back to the gate. He said, without turning around, "You've been watching from the south corridor for about 4 minutes. You should have moved faster. The window from south corridor to outer yard transit is under 2 minutes before the changing of the secondary watch." The assassin stepped into the yard. "You're not what I expected," he said. His Asgardian was accented, older dialect, formal, which told Harry he'd been briefed rather than raised to it. "A child. Everyone who's ever underestimated me started that way," said Harry. He turned around, and his voice was pleasant and his posture was easy, and the assassin took in the 11-year-old standing across the yard from him and made the last significant miscalculation of his morning. "Who sent you? Names aren't part of the arrangement. Who's worried enough about me to send someone from?" Harry tilted his head. "Nornheim. The blade. And there's frost on your left hand that hasn't fully melted yet, so you're at least half Frost Giant, which means you probably came through the northern passages." He glanced at the blade. "That's a disruption weapon. Specifically designed to cut through magical defense. Which means whoever sent you knew what I can do, or knew enough to guess." The assassin moved. He was very fast. Properly fast, the kind of fast that came from centuries of survival rather than training yard practice, the kind that closed distance before most opponents could register the decision to move. He crossed the yard in a fraction of a second with the Nornheim blade angled for the space between Harry's shoulder and throat. Harry was not there. He had moved, not a dodge, exactly, something more efficient than that, more like a redirection, like the space had simply renegotiated where he was, and the blade hit stone and struck sparks, and Harry was 4 feet to the left and slightly above, having used the low wall at the yard's edge as a launch point. The problem with disruption weapons, Harry said, landing lightly, is that they only work if you actually hit me. The assassin came again, faster this time, adapting, because he was not incompetent, he was actually very good, Harry registered, which made this more interesting than a simple exercise in evasion. He was strong and he had reach, and the blade was actively affecting the ambient magic in the yard, cutting through the environmental sear that Harry instinctively laid down the way other people laid down footsteps. It was like fighting with one hand wrapped, not crippling but noticeable. Harry let him push the engagement for 30 seconds. Let him land 2 strikes that would have been serious hits if Harry hadn't bent them into glancing blows, one on his left forearm, one across his right hip, both leaving marks that would bruise but nothing more. He was paying attention, cataloging, building the picture. Then he stopped retreating. What happened next was quick enough that the single guard at the far gate, who had finally noticed something was wrong and was running toward the yard, saw only the end of it, the assassin's blade on the ground 6 feet from his hand, the assassin himself face first against the yard wall with both arms at an angle that strongly suggested they had been encouraged to go there, and Harry standing behind him with one hand resting on the back of the frost giant's neck and the magic in the air thick enough to see, that blue-white flame quality, the thing that wasn't sear, the thing that wasn't anything with a tidy name. "Here's what happens now," Harry said, and his voice was perfectly calm, the calm of someone for whom this was a problem being solved rather than a crisis being survived. "You're going to tell me who sent you and why they're worried about me. Not because I'm threatening you, though I am, but because I'm genuinely curious and because whoever sent you should probably know that this approach wasn't effective and adjust their strategy accordingly. It's in everyone's interest." The assassin, with his face against the wall and his arms at their unhappy angle and the weight of Harry's magic pressing down on the back of his neck like a physical thing, said, "You're 11 years old." "I'm aware," said Harry. "Name. And the organization. Please." A pause. Then, in a tone of someone reconciling themselves to an outcome, "The Veatir. The old families. Those who remember what the space between realms looked like before Asgard drew its lines. And they're worried about me specifically because of what you are," the assassin said. "What you could become. The old writings, those who study them say there hasn't been a confluence in 1,000 years. The last one," he stopped. "What about the last one?" Harry said. "Changed the map," the assassin said. "Literally. Rewrote the boundaries between realms. 3 realms ceased to be separate entities. They became one territory." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Right," and stepped back, and released the pressure, and the assassin straightened up slowly and turned to find Harry already walking toward the guard who had finally reached the yard entrance. "Escort him to the outer gate," Harry told the guard. "Give him his blade back." The guard blinked. "My lord, he tried to kill me, yes. And he's going to go back and tell his people that killing me isn't a workable strategy." Harry looked at the assassin. "You're going to do that, aren't you?" The assassin looked at him for a long moment. "The Veatir will not stop," he said. "Not a threat. An honest statement of fact." "Good," said Harry. "I'd hate for it to be boring." Loki arrived at the outer yard 20 minutes later to find Harry sitting on the low wall with a cloth wrapped around his forearm where the blade had caught him, eating an apple, and making notes in the small journal he'd started keeping around age 9 in a cipher of his own design that combined 3 different writing systems. "The council was disrupted by a runner," Loki said. He looked at the cloth on Harry's arm, at the scuff marks on the stone where the fight had clearly crossed the yard, at the absence of any body. "You let him go." "He was a messenger," said Harry. "Killing messengers is bad strategy. You taught me that." I taught you that in the context of diplomatic communications, not assassination attempts. The principle holds. Harry turned a page in his journal. Do you know what the Veatir are? A pause. Where did you hear that name? From the man who just tried to kill me. Harry looked up. He said they're old families who study the space between realms. He said the last confluence rewrote the boundary maps of 3 realms. He paused. He was talking about me. About what I am. Loki sat down on the wall beside him. He was quiet for a moment, in a way that told Harry he was deciding how much to say. Harry waited. He'd learned years ago that rushing Loki's decisions produced incomplete information and that waiting always produced more. I've known about the Veatir for some time, Loki said. They're old. Older than Asgard as a political entity. They predate the Allfather's consolidation of the 9 realms. They believe that Asgard's drawing of boundaries between realms was a violation, is the word they'd use. An imposition of order on a cosmos that was functioning through controlled chaos. Were they wrong? Harry asked. They were partly wrong and partly right and entirely dangerous, said Loki, which is the most dangerous kind of partly right to be. He looked at the cloth on Harry's arm. Let me see that. Harry unwrapped it. The cut was clean, not deep, already showing the faster-than-human healing that had been one of the early indicators that whatever Harry was, it was not simply Midgardian. Loki ran his fingers along it and the seer closed the last of it, and Harry flexed his arm and nodded. They think I'm going to rewrite the realms again, Harry said. What do you think? Harry looked across the empty yard. I think I'm 11 and I'm more interested in whether I can disarm Hela before the end of the year than in geopolitical cosmology. He paused. But I also think that the Veatir are going to keep sending people and at some point the people they send will be more prepared than this one was. Yes, said Loki. So we should know as much about them as possible. Harry closed his journal. I need to see that old book of yours. The one in the locked shelf. Loki looked at him. You think I don't know about it, Harry said. I've known about it for 3 years. You take it out at night when you think I'm asleep. I can feel the magic in it. It's talking about me, isn't it? A long pause. Yes, said Loki. Then I should probably read it. It's in a dead language. Teach me the dead language, said Harry. Hela took the news about the assassination attempt the way she took most news about threats to Harry, not with alarm, which would have implied surprise, but with a particular quality of cold attention that was somehow more intimidating than alarm would have been. The Veatir, she said. She was standing at the window of her own chambers, which were considerably more austere than Loki's and contained nothing decorative except a single tapestry that depicted something historical and violent in great detail. I know that name. Apparently so does the entire ancient world, said Loki. I've had dealings with their fringe scholars in Niflheim, she said. They believe the space between life and death is a territory, not a transition. They've been petitioning my authority over it for centuries. She paused. I've been declining. They're worried about what Harry might become, said Loki. What Harry might become, she said slowly, is the point where my authority over death, your mastery of magic, and whatever he fundamentally is all converge. Which would mean, she stopped. Which would mean a single entity with full sovereign authority over the spaces between all the realms, said Loki. Not just the boundary between life and death. All of them. The gaps in the Yggdrasil itself. Does he know? He knows enough. He wants to read the book. Hela looked at him. Let him. He's 11, Hela. He disarmed a Nornheim-bladed frost giant assassin this morning and took notes afterward, she said. He can handle a book. She turned back to the window. Bring him to me tomorrow morning. We're going to change the training. To what? To everything, she said simply. The library session that night lasted 4 hours. Loki opened the locked shelf and took out the book and set it between them on the table, and Harry looked at it for a moment with his head tilted and his expression doing the thing it did when he was registering something he'd already half known but was now seeing confirmed. "It's warmer than it should be," Harry said. "Yes. Because it's about something still alive." "Something about that," said Loki carefully, "yes." Harry opened it. He looked at the script on the first page, the dead language, the one with no surviving speakers, the one Loki had been picking apart for centuries. He was quiet for a moment. "This word," he said, pointing to the first significant glyph. "It's related to the Old Tongue, isn't it? The Proto-Seer language. This root structure here," he traced the marks with one finger. "It's the same as the word for meeting place in the early Asgardian bardic tradition." Loki stared at him. "How do you know the early Asgardian bardic tradition?" "I read everything on your shelves," said Harry. "I started with the top left shelf when I was 7 and I've been working my way around." A pause. "I've been through it twice. You have gaps in the Old Tongue collection. I borrowed some volumes from the palace library to fill them." Loki opened his mouth and closed it again. "Also," said Harry, turning a page, "you should know that the third volume from the right on the bottom shelf of the secondary case is a very poorly executed forgery. Whoever made it had the surface markings right but got the binding material wrong. The fibers are Midgardian hemp, not Vanaheim flax. It would have been made in the last 5 centuries, not the 4,000 years the title claims." "I know," said Loki faintly. "I put it there to see if any of my palace visitors would notice." "Has anyone?" "You're the first." Harry looked back at the ancient book. "Teach me this. The full language. Tonight." "That could start with the roots," said Harry. "I'll do the rest." By midnight he had the root structure. By the following week he had the grammar. By the end of the month he sat down with the ancient text and read it from the first page to the last without stopping, in the particular focused silence of someone engaged in an encounter with something significant. When he finished he sat back and was quiet for a long time. Loki, who had pretended to be reading but had actually been watching Harry's face for the duration, waited. "So," Harry said finally. "I'm a convergence of all magical channels from every realm. The space between intention and result." He turned the book over in his hands, looking at the cover. "And the Vaetir are afraid of me because the last time something like me existed, 3 realms were permanently merged and the cosmological map changed. That's the relevant section, yes. And Odin," he stopped. "He knew. That's what you think. That he knew before we arrived. That I wondered when this day would come was not surprise, it was recognition," said Loki. "Yes. That's what I think." Harry set the book down carefully. "Did he have something to do with it? With what I am?" "I don't know," said Loki honestly. "But I intend to find out." Harry nodded slowly. Then he did something Loki hadn't quite expected. He looked up at him with those green eyes, which held all the information the book and the training sessions and the assassination attempt had given him, all of it processed and filed and understood, and he said, "It doesn't change anything. You know that, right? Whatever I am, whatever the book says, it doesn't change anything about this." He gestured between them, at the library, at the palace beyond the window. "You're still going to make me run the third illusion framework tomorrow. Hela's still going to try to disarm me. I'm still going to eat breakfast in your sitting room." He picked the book back up. "I just know more now." Loki looked at him. "You're not frightened," he said. "I'm also the point where death and magic converge," said Harry. "Being frightened seems a bit redundant. That's the most Hela thing you've ever said. Don't tell her that. She'll be unbearable." Hela changed the training the way she promised, and what changed was that she stopped treating it as training and started treating it as something between preparation and collaboration. She brought Harry to Niflheim twice in the next year, not to the dark places, not to the cold, but to the border territories where life and death ran alongside each other like parallel rivers, and she taught him to feel the difference and then to stand in the space between them. Most things, she told him, on the edge of a cliff that looked out over a valley where every tree was half in bloom and half bare, where the ground was warm on the left side and cold on the right, are afraid of this place. Because it's death. Because it's neither, she said. Being neither is harder to manage than being one thing. People want to know which side of a line you're on. The people who don't fit lines make everyone else uncomfortable. I know a lot about that, said Harry. Yes, she said. You do. She turned to look at him. This is your territory, in a way it isn't quite mine. Death is my domain. But the space before death, the space where the decision is still being made, that belongs to something that has no single claim on it. The confluence, said Harry. The space between words, she said, and she used his phrase from years ago without commenting on it, and he heard her do it and understood that she had always been paying closer attention than she let on. What can you do here? He reached out, not physically, but in the way he reached into that space between intention and result, and touched the boundary. The valley below them rippled. The half-bare trees on the right side pushed out new leaves, and the trees on the left side held their blossoms longer, and for a moment everything in the valley was both at once, alive and resting, blooming and waiting. Both, he said. I can be both. Hela watched the valley. Don't lead with that, she said. It frightens even me, a little. And I would advise not frightening things needlessly. Unless they need it, he said. The corner of her mouth. Unless they need it, she agreed. It was Loki who told him about Hogwarts. Not with the letter arrived on a completely ordinary morning 6 weeks before Harry's 11th birthday, delivered not by Owl, which would have had a difficult time finding the right window in Asgard's palace, but by a small flame that appeared in the center of the breakfast table and resolved itself into a folded envelope addressed in green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the Palace of Asgard, the 9 Realms. The delivery method impressed Loki. He noted it with the expression he wore when encountering something that had made an unexpectedly clever decision. Harry picked up the envelope and turned it over. Looked at the seal, a crest with a badger, a lion, an eagle, a snake, and a tree. Put it down and went back to his porridge. You're not going to open it, said Loki. I know what it is, said Harry. Hela looked at it. What is it? A school invitation, said Harry. From the wizarding school in Scotland. There's one in England for people with magic. You knew about this, said Loki. You have books on Midgardian magical institutions, said Harry. I read them. Of course you did. Loki picked up the envelope, turned it over. Are you interested? I'm curious, Harry said. It's Midgard. It's where I'm from. And they'll have things we don't have, a different tradition entirely. Different ways of thinking about magic. He considered. And you always say the most useful thing you can do is study the frameworks you didn't grow up in. I did say that. So. Harry looked at the envelope. I want to go. Hela said, very precisely, to a Midgardian school. Yes. A school for children. I am a child, said Harry. Technically. You are arguably the most powerful magical being in several realms, said Hela. The idea of sending you to a, she paused, containing whatever she wanted to say. Fine. But we go to Midgard first. For supplies. Together. Harry looked at Loki. Loki looked at Harry. She wants to see it, Harry said. She absolutely wants to see it, Loki agreed. I want to assess the environment, said Hela. Of course you do, said Loki. That was not a subject for amusement. No, said Harry, and his voice was perfectly serious and his eyes were absolutely not. Of course not. Chapter 3, The letter and the lightning Diagon Alley on a bright August morning smelled like old parchment and something faintly chemical and the particular warmth of a crowd that had been milling in a narrow space since early doors. Harry stepped through the leaky cauldron, through the back, through the brick wall that Loki had found in approximately 4 seconds by the simple method of looking at where the magic was thickest, and stood at the entrance to the alley and took it in. It was smaller than he'd imagined. Not disappointing, just smaller, the way real places always are when you've been building them in your head from written descriptions. The cobblestones were uneven and the shop fronts were crooked and things moved in windows that weren't supposed to move and the people moved through it all with the comfortable ease of those who had never had to explain any of it to anyone. "It's very quaint," said Hela, behind him. "It's charming," said Loki, who was looking at everything with the expression he wore in good bookshops and ancient ruins, the same expression, notably. "Those are not the same thing," said Hela. "Quaint implies it has peaked. Charming implies it has potential." Loki stepped out into the alley properly and tilted his head at a window full of moving star charts. "This is doing something interesting with astronomical seer. The methodology is completely different from ours." "They call it something else," said Harry. He was walking already, hands in the pockets of the clothes Hela had decreed, dark, well-fitted, nothing that would mark him as Midgardian ordinary or Asgardian formal, something in between that managed to look like it belonged everywhere and nowhere in particular. "Magic here is more instinct-based than structural, from what I read. They use focal tools, wands, to give it direction." "Focal tools," Loki repeated, like he was tasting the concept. "Interesting. Inefficient, potentially, but interesting." "Potentially," Harry agreed. "Or potentially more efficient in certain applications because the focus creates consistency that pure intention-based casting can miss when you're tired or distracted." Loki looked at him sideways. "That's a reasonable point. I occasionally have those." People moved around them in the alley, and a few of them looked twice, at Harry, at Loki in his green coat, at Hela in black with the particular quality of presence she carried everywhere that made crowds develop a natural awareness of where she was and arrange themselves accordingly. No one said anything. Diagon Alley, on the whole, maintained a policy of productive minding of one's own business that was one of its better qualities. They collected the school list from the letter and worked through it in order. Robes from Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood on the fitting platform with his arms out and the witch with the pins moved around him with professional efficiency and kept glancing at Hela, who was standing in the corner with her arms folded looking like someone had brought the architecture to life and given it an opinion about hemlines. "Your shoulders are broader than our standard pattern," Madame Malkin observed to Harry. "I train," he said. "Oh yes. What sort of training?" "Combat," he said. "Mostly sword work, some hand-to-hand, some magic under physical duress." Madame Malkin paused with a pin between her fingers. "For school," she said. "For life, generally," said Harry pleasantly. The robes were adjusted. He got 3 sets in the correct black, plus the additional formal set Hela insisted on having made, which was black with silver work at the collar and cuffs that Madame Malkin produced with impressive speed and then charged an impressive amount for. Books from Flourish and Blots took the longest, not because the list was extensive but because Loki found the history section and had to be physically extracted from it 20 minutes later carrying 6 volumes that were not on any school list, 2 of which were about the theoretical foundations of wand magic and one of which was a 500-year-old text on something called arithmancy that he declared was seer renamed and would require close study. "You're worse than I am in a library," Harry told him, as Loki handed over coins from the Asgardian gold he'd had converted in Gringotts the previous hour. "I found 6 books in 20 minutes, said Loki. "You took 4 hours with my library on your first pass." "I was 7. The principle stands. Cauldrons, scales, telescope, all straightforward." The apothecary was interesting to Loki and faintly appalling to Hela, who looked at a jar of boomslang skin with the expression of someone deciding whether to be offended on professional grounds by the casual storage of something that ought to be handled with more ceremony. The wand was last. Ollivander's sat at the end of a side passage, its window displaying a single wand on a faded cushion, the shop front so old it seemed to predate the alley around it. Harry stood outside it for a moment looking at the sign, at the dust on the window, at the single wand that somehow managed to radiate significance despite being an inanimate object in a glass case. "You don't need one," said Loki. "Technically." "No," said Harry. "But they're tradition here. And interesting. And I want to see what it picks." "If any pick," said Hela. "Given what you are." "That's what makes it interesting," said Harry, and pushed open the door. The inside of Ollivander's was narrow and tall and smelled of sawdust and something ancient and resinous, and the shelves went up to the ceiling and the ceiling was higher than the outside of the building suggested it should be, which was the kind of spatial discrepancy that Harry found professionally interesting. Ollivander himself appeared from between shelves, old in the way that certain things are old, old in the way that implied a personal relationship with time rather than just an accumulation of it. He had silver eyes and the quality of focus that Harry recognized from very skilled practitioners, the kind of attention that didn't so much look at you as read you. He stopped when he saw Harry. Not with recognition exactly, more with the careful attention of someone encountering a measurement they hadn't accounted for. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Mr. Ollivander," said Harry. "I've been wondering when you'd come." He glanced past Harry at Loki and Hela, and his silver eyes did something complicated that he kept mostly off his face. "You've brought family," said Harry. Ollivander returned his attention to Harry, circling him slowly with the air of someone taking measurements that weren't physical. "Yes." "Well. Wand arm, if you please." Harry held out his right hand and Ollivander measured it, length, width, the space between knuckle and fingertip, in the old way, with a tape that moved by itself and noted numbers that Harry couldn't quite see. "Interesting," Ollivander said, mostly to himself. "Very interesting. The wand chooses the wizard, as I've always said. But in your case, I suspect the choosing will require some negotiation." He disappeared between the shelves and came back with a box, offered the wand inside, 11 inches, vine wood, dragon heartstring, and Harry picked it up and the magic in the wand and the magic in Harry looked at each other and found the comparison unflattering in both directions. Harry set it down. The second wand fared no better. Nor the third. Nor the 9th. By the 15th, Ollivander had an expression that was equally parts baffled and delighted, which was clearly an emotional combination he enjoyed. He was disappearing further and further into the shelves, returning with increasingly unusual combinations, and the pile of rejected wands was growing on the counter with the particular quality of objects that had briefly attempted something and been found wanting. "Holly," Ollivander said, reappearing from the depths with a box that he held differently from the others, more carefully, or perhaps with more interest. 11 inches. Rather supple. He paused. Phoenix feather core. He held it out. Harry picked it up. The magic didn't negotiate. It didn't circle or test or tentatively extend. It recognized. Immediately and completely, the way a language recognizes a native speaker after years of hearing it spoken badly, the relief of that, the rightness. The wand warmed in Harry's hand and the warmth spread up his arm and the ambient magic in the shop, which had been slightly agitated by 15 failed attempts, settled all at once into a stillness that felt like held breath. Then the phoenix feather in the core resonated with something in Harry that wasn't seer and wasn't his Midgardian magic exactly but was the thing underneath both, the confluence, the meeting place, and every wand in the shop trembled in its box. Not violently. Not dangerously. Like they'd all simultaneously recognized something they'd been wondering about. Ollivander was staring at him. "The phoenix who gave that feather," he said quietly, "gave only one other feather. Only one other." "I know," said Harry. He was looking at the wand in his hand. "The one that gave me this scar." He touched the lightning bolt on his forehead without looking away from the wand. "I've read about Voldemort." Behind him, Loki said nothing. Hela said nothing. But he felt them both shift slightly, the way they did when something had moved on to the threat register. "Yes," said Ollivander. "Well. He seemed to be reconsidering something. Curious indeed. 7 galleons. Harry set the coins on the counter and tucked the wand into his sleeve holder, an Asgardian piece Loki had made him 3 years ago, sized for a practice blade but adaptable, and turned to find Loki looking at the shop with an expression that was doing its best to be neutral and wasn't quite making it. "The twin wand," Loki said, as they left. "Yes," said Harry. "And you're not worried?" Harry stepped back out into the alley. "No. He made a Horcrux and tried to kill me as a baby, and apparently my mother's magic bounced the killing curse back at him. And now he made a gesture that indicated a state somewhere between alive and not, whatever he currently is. I'm aware." He glanced back at the shop. "What I'm more interested in is how my mother's magic did that. A Midgardian witch with no connection to Asgardian seer producing a defense strong enough to repel an unforgivable curse." He paused. "That's worth investigating." "Agreed," said Loki. "I'd like to see Gringotts," said Harry. "Specifically, I'd like to open my family vault." Hela, who had said nothing since Ollivanders, spoke now. "Your family vault. The Potter family vault. I have access to it by birthright. I've never been." He looked between them. "My mother was reportedly exceptionally gifted. My father came from an old Midgardian wizarding family. There may be information about both in the vault." He paused again. "Also, apparently I have money, and I should probably know about that." Gringotts was impressive in the way that things built to convey the impression of absolute authority over valuable things were impressive. The goblins moved through it with the efficiency of a system that had been optimized over centuries and had strong opinions about deviation. Harry walked in between Loki and Hela, and the goblins at the front desk assessed all three of them with the particular attention of beings whose professional relationship with powerful things had given them excellent calibration. The one at the central desk looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he said, in gobbledygook, "The account manager for the Potter family would see you. If you are Harry James Potter." Harry replied in gobbledygook, which he'd learned 8 months ago from a trade text in Loki's library. "I am. And I'd appreciate that, if he's available." The goblin's expression didn't change, but his posture did, slightly. "You speak our language?" "Imperfectly," said Harry. "I'm told my conjugation in the future inferential tense needs work." A pause. "Most wizards don't bother," the goblin said. "Most wizards miss a lot of things," said Harry pleasantly. They were shown through the marble halls to a back office where a goblin named Ragnarok, old even by goblin standards, with the permanent expression of someone who had been right about most things for a very long time, waited behind a desk covered in documents and a single large ledger open to a page that he closed when they entered. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said. "I have been waiting for this meeting for several years." "I'm sorry I was delayed," said Harry. "I was in Asgard." Ragnarok looked at Loki and Hela with the frank assessment of someone for whom the powerful and the ancient were simply an occupational category. "Yes," he said. "I can see that." He opened a drawer and produced a key, old, heavier than the standard Gringotts issue, the kind that opened something more complex than a single vault. "The Potter family vault contains what you'd expect. Inheritance, investments, family records." He put a second key on the desk alongside it, and this one was different, older still, black metal, with a surface that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. "This is the other matter." "What other matter?" said Loki. Ragnarok looked at him briefly, then back at Harry. "There is a secondary vault. Not a Potter vault. It was established approximately 500 years before the Potter family came into existence. It was left in trust for whoever eventually arrived to claim it, with the stipulation that the claimant would be identified by 3 criteria. He folded his hands. First, magic that does not belong to any single tradition. Second, a scar in the shape of a bridge between states of being. He glanced at Harry's forehead. Third, they would arrive accompanied by death and deception. Complete silence in the room. Harry looked at Hela and Loki. Loki looked like he'd opened a book to find it had already been about him. Hela said, "Death and deception." "The vault's own language," said Ragnarok, without apparent irony. "I did not write the criteria." "Who did?" said Harry. Ragnarok turned the ledger around and showed him the name on the account registration. The name was in an old script, older than the standard gobbledygook used in current banking, older than most things in the building. Harry looked at it and went very still. "Can you read that?" Loki asked him. "Yes," said Harry. He looked up. "It's in the same language as the book in your library." A silence in the room that had a different quality from the ones before it. "The vault has been here for 500 years, Harry said to Ragnarok. "Longer than this building," Ragnarok said. "The vault predates Gringotts. When we built this location, we built around it. We have had occasional inquiries, from researchers, from certain old families, from one Albus Dumbledore approximately 50 years ago." A pause. "We declined to confirm its existence. But you're confirming it to me." "You meet the criteria," said Ragnarok simply. "The criteria are quite specific about confidentiality obligations expiring upon the correct claimant's arrival." Harry picked up the black key. It was warm, the way the wand had been warm, the way the ancient book was warm, the warmth of something that had been waiting rather than the warmth of something recently heated. He looked at it for a moment. "Take me down," he said. The regular Potter vault was first, efficiently visited, the gold noted, the family documents collected in a sealed case for later review. Loki found a shelf of Potter family notebooks that he added to the case over Harry's mild protest that he was supposed to be getting the documents, not acquiring a new project. Hela looked at the family tapestry on the vault wall and traced the lineage with one finger and said nothing. Then the cart went deeper. Past the regular levels, past the deeper security vaults where the air grew colder and the torches changed color, down into a section of Gringotts that the cart operator, a different goblin from the one who'd handled the upper vaults, older, quieter, navigated with the attention of someone on familiar but never casual ground. The vault at the bottom was not a vault in the standard sense. It was a room. Large, vaulted ceiling, walls of the same black stone as the key, lit by sources that Harry couldn't immediately identify because the light didn't seem to be coming from any specific point but from the room itself, from the stone, from something built into the architecture. It was not empty. Along the walls were shelves. Books, mostly, bound in materials Harry couldn't immediately identify, in scripts from a dozen different traditions, organized in a system that appeared to be chronological but on a timescale that made the oldest Asgardian histories look recent. In the center of the room there was a table, and on the table there was a single object, a stone about the size of a fist, dark, ordinary-looking in the way that only extraordinary things could manage. Harry walked to the table and looked at the stone. Loki appeared at his shoulder. He looked at the stone and his breath came out slowly. "Harry." "I know," said Harry. "Is that what I think? I don't know yet." Harry reached out. The stone was warm. He picked it up and the room around them did something that wasn't sound and wasn't light but was both, a resonance, deep and fundamental, the kind of vibration that wasn't felt through ears or skin but through whatever part of a person was made of the same stuff as the universe. The magic in Harry, the confluence, the meeting place, the point where all channels converged, reached out and touched whatever was in the stone, and the stone answered, and for one moment Harry could feel the shape of every boundary in the 9 realms simultaneously. Every wall between life and death, between one realm and the next, between intention and result. All of it. All at once. A map, complete and immediate, of everything that separated anything from everything else. He set the stone down. The sensation faded slowly, like a very loud sound leaving the air. "That," he said carefully, "is going to require some significant research." "Yes," said Loki, who had gone slightly pale. "It is." Hela was standing in the doorway of the vault. She had not come in, which was unusual. Hela didn't hesitate at doorways. She was looking at the stone with an expression that Harry had never seen on her face before, not fear, not awe exactly, but a kind of recognition that was older than either of those things. Hela, Harry said. What is it? She looked at him for a moment. That stone, she said, is made from the boundary itself. The actual substance of the wall between life and death. She paused. Whoever made that vault, and whatever they were trying to build, they somehow extracted physical matter from the space I govern. She looked at him. And they left it for you. Which means, said Harry, whoever made this vault knew what I was before I was born. Or, said Loki quietly, before you were made. They came back up into the marble hall of Gringotts with the stone in a lead-lined case that Ragnarok had provided with the professional ease of someone who had been expecting this request, and Harry walked through the alley with the case in his hand and the wand at his wrist and the weight of the morning's accumulated revelation sitting on him in a way that he was processing in real time, filing and connecting and building the picture. Loki let him think. Hela walked on his other side and didn't speak, which was her version of giving him space. He stopped them at the entrance to the leaky cauldron and turned to look back at the alley, at the crooked shops and the moving windows and the ordinary magical people going about their ordinary magical lives in their narrow cobblestoned world. This is where I came from, he said. Not sadly. Observationally. Part of where you came from, said Loki. It feels, he looked for the word. Small. It is small, said Hela. That's not a flaw. Small things can be important. I don't mean it badly, Harry said. I mean, I grew up looking out at Asgard. Looking at the Bifrost. Looking at the palace and the waterfall and the edge of the world. And this is, he looked at the entrance to the alley. A narrow street in London. The universe contains both, said Loki. Narrow streets and the edge of the world. Your origin is here. Your history is here. That doesn't make it your ceiling. Harry looked at him. That was surprisingly wise. I'm consistently wise, said Loki. You just don't notice because you're usually arguing with me. I argue because you're usually at least partially wrong. I am never, the forge incident, said Harry. That was a calculated risk, the thing with the bridge calculations, experimental methodology, the time you told me that Frost Giant political history was, broadly similar, to Asgardian and I spent a week with the wrong framework. All right, said Loki. The Frost Giant situation was an oversight. Thank you, said Harry, and turned back through the leaky cauldron with the lead-lined case and the wand and a holly and phoenix feather connection to the darkest wizard in a generation and an entire vault full of questions that were going to need answers. That night, in the leaky cauldron room Loki had taken for the evening, nicer than it looked from the outside, Loki having made several improvements to it before Harry arrived, which Harry had noticed and not commented on because it would embarrass him, they spread everything out on the table. The Potter family documents. The vault inventory. Ragnarok's translation notes on the old script that matched Loki's dead language. The lead-lined case. The wand in its holster. Harry's mother's notes were in a sealed bundle at the center of the Potter family documents. The seal bore her name in her own handwriting, Lily J. Potter, née Evans, and it cracked when Harry touched it, as though it had been waiting for specifically him. He opened it carefully. The notes inside were remarkable. Not because they were magically unusual, but because Lily Potter had been, by any standard of measurement, one of the most brilliant magical minds the Midgardian wizarding tradition had produced in 2 generations. Her notes on protection charms alone ran to 40 pages of dense, precise work, the kind that showed not just understanding but genuine innovation. She hadn't just learned the existing frameworks, she'd found the limits of them and started building past the edges. Harry read through them with increasing attention and very little expression. Your mother, said Loki, reading over his shoulder, derived a theory for converting emotional states directly into magical intensity. He sounded impressed. Without seer scaffolding. Entirely intuitive mechanics. And she was right, said Harry. He turned a page. Look at this. She figured out that the killing curse works by severing the attachment between a person's magical core and their physical existence. And that the counter, he stopped. What? Said Loki. She didn't find a counter, Harry said. She found something else. She found that if the magical attachment between a person and another person, specifically a parent-child bond, was strong enough, it could be used to redirect the severing. Not block it. Redirect it back along the path it came. He sat back. She didn't use a counter curse. She used love as a literal mechanism. An actual functioning magical principle. The room was quiet. That's, Loki started. Extraordinary, Harry said. And it saved me. And it, he looked at the notes. It means part of her magic is in me. Actually in me. It's part of why I'm what I am. The confluence was already forming in me at birth, and then her magic was woven into it when she died, and it became, he paused. More. She made you stronger when she saved you, said Hela. She made me more complicated, Harry said, and something in his voice was quiet in a way it didn't often get. She never got to know what I became. A pause. Hela said, no. Was it worth it? He looked at her, and his eyes were clear. He wasn't asking for comfort, he was asking for an honest answer. From your perspective, from the perspective of someone who knows what death actually is, was it worth it? Dying to make me something larger. Hela looked at him for a long moment. I don't deal in worth, she said finally. I deal in what is. She chose. The choice produced you. What you do with what she chose to produce, that's yours. But if she'd lived, he said. Then she'd be alive, said Hela. And you'd be something different. And we can't know if that something different would have been better or worse. What we know is what exists. She paused. What exists is you. Reading her notes. Understanding her magic. Going to her world, the world she came from, and carrying all of it with you. Harry looked at the notes in his hands for a moment longer. Then he folded them carefully and put them back in their bundle and set the bundle aside. Right, he said. He pulled the school list back toward him. I still need an owl. They found the owl in a small shop off the main alley, a snowy white bird that was either extraordinarily well-bred or had been waiting with specific patience for the right person, because when Harry came in and looked at the cages, she looked back at him with the large amber-eyed attention of something that had made a decision, and he bought her without any further investigation. He named her Elara, which was from an old Asgardian word for the space where starlight goes when it's finished being starlight. Hela approved of this, which meant she said nothing. Loki said it was etymologically sound. Harry took both as endorsements. They departed Diagon Alley in the late afternoon with everything on the list and several things not on the list, and Hela made one last stop that she'd said nothing about, a small, old shop with no sign outside, in a side passage off the main alley that most people walked past without registering. Inside were weapons. Old ones, not decorative, not the tourist market versions, but functional historical pieces with the faint residual magic of things that had been used for serious purposes. The shopkeeper was a small wizard of indeterminate age who looked at Hela, looked at his inventory, and quietly decided to find somewhere else to stand. Hela looked at the knives behind the glass for approximately 30 seconds and then turned to Harry. Your birthday is in 3 weeks. Harry looked at the knives. Then at Hela. I thought you said we were getting everything on the school list. The school list does not account for everything, said Hela. He got a black-handled knife that fit his hand exactly as though it had been built for it, which Hela paid for in Midgardian pounds from somewhere Harry decided not to ask about, and which he tucked into the sheath at his left wrist that mirrored the wand holster on his right. The school will have objections, Loki said mildly. The school can form a queue, said Hela. Harry said nothing, but as they walked back toward the leaky cauldron and the return trip to Asgard, the corner of his mouth was doing the small, satisfied thing that he'd inherited, somehow, from both of them, Hela's absolute certainty that the world would adjust its expectations before she adjusted herself, and Loki's quiet pleasure in being exactly who he was and watching other people's calculations fail to account for it. They stepped through the fireplace at the leaky cauldron and were gone, and behind them, in the lead-lined case on the table in the room Loki had improved, the stone waited patiently in its darkness. Not for long, though. Because beneath Gringotts, in the vault that predated everything, something had been sleeping for 500 years, and Harry's hands on the stone had disturbed its sleep, and it was not entirely back to rest yet. It was paying attention now. And deep in the restricted archives of Hogwarts Castle, in the office of Albus Dumbledore, a thin, golden instrument that had been sitting untouched on a shelf for 10 years began, slowly and with increasing conviction, to spin. Chapter 4, Hogwarts has never seen anything like this. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it because Loki had insisted that arriving by Bifrost directly into the castle grounds was, while technically possible and personally satisfying, probably not the right opening move. "You want them slightly uncertain about you," Loki had said, the night before, sitting across from Harry in the library with his feet up and a cup of tea going cold beside him. "Not immediately terrified. Uncertain is more useful. It gives you room to operate." "I'm going to school," Harry said. "Not infiltrating a foreign government." "Those are not mutually exclusive goals," said Loki, "and the skill sets overlap significantly." Hela had said nothing during this exchange but had handed Harry a small jade disc on a cord, a piece of Asgardian wardwork, one of her own, that she'd been making for 2 weeks in the evenings. It was calibrated to her specifically, which meant that in the event of something going seriously wrong, she would feel it. Not an alarm. Something more direct than that. She'd put it around his neck without ceremony and not said anything about what it was, and Harry had worn it without asking, because he understood the language of sharp edges. Platform 9 3/4 was loud and smelled of steam and nervous excitement and the particular kind of organized chaos that came from several hundred children and their families all trying to perform the same task in the same space at the same time. Harry moved through it with his trunk and Alara in her cage and the green-eyed, unhurried quality of someone who had learned to move through Asgardian great halls during feast days and found the comparison favorable. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, and sat down with Alara's cage on the rack above and the ancient text he was currently working through, the vault's catalogue, which he was translating section by section, open on his knee, and waited for the train to move. The compartment door opened before they'd left the station. A girl came in, brown bushy hair, expression of concentrated purpose, a book already open in one hand. She looked at Harry, at the cage, at the book in his lap, and then at the book more specifically, and said, "What language is that?" "A dead one," said Harry. "Which one?" "It doesn't have a surviving name," Harry said. "It's the proto-language of the Asgardian bardic tradition, possibly. Or something older than that." The girl sat down across from him with the efficiency of someone who had decided this was where she was meant to be. "You've been to Asgard?" "I live there," said Harry. "Harry Potter." She stared at him. Not at the scar specifically, or not only at the scar, but at all of him, in the comprehensive way of someone recalibrating a significant number of prior assumptions simultaneously. "Hermione Granger," she said. "You're real." "Generally," said Harry. "I read about you." "Well, I read about what happened. The killing curse. When you were a baby." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she probably said everything, as information rather than as something requiring emotional management. "Everyone thought you were with your relatives." "I was, briefly," said Harry. "Then I wasn't." "And you've been in Asgard? With actual Asgardians?" She leaned forward slightly. "What's it like?" Harry looked at her. She was watching him with the focused intensity of someone who asked questions because she actually wanted answers rather than because conversation required them, which was, in his experience, relatively rare. "Cold in winter," he said. "Very cold. The library is extraordinary. The training is thorough." "What kind of training?" "Combat, mostly. Magic theory. History across multiple realms. Multiple, she stopped. Started again, more carefully. You know magic from multiple traditions. Asgardian seer, primarily, said Harry. But also whatever I apparently have naturally, which doesn't have a tidy name. And now Midgardian wand work, which I've been reading about but haven't had much practical experience with yet. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. You're going to be very unusual at Hogwarts, she said. Probably, Harry agreed. I've read all the textbooks already, she said. All of them. And several of the supplementary texts on the reading list, and some that weren't on it. She paused, seeming to consider whether this was the right thing to say. I want to understand things properly. So do I, said Harry. Something in Hermione's posture shifted, fractionally, the way things shift when a person who has been slightly braced for judgment realizes judgment is not forthcoming. She opened her book. Harry returned to his translation. The train moved. They were somewhere in the Midlands when the compartment door opened again and 3 boys appeared in it, one with white blonde hair and the quality of someone who had learned to use their family name as an advanced team, flanked by 2 larger ones who were mostly architecture. They're saying Harry Potter's on this train, the blonde one said, looking at Harry with the particular assessment of someone who has prepared for this moment and is now comparing reality to the preparation. So it's true. You actually exist. Extensively, said Harry. The boy's eyes went to the scar. Then to the book in Harry's lap. Then to Alara in her cage. Then back to Harry, doing the recalibration that everyone seemed to do, but doing it faster than most. Draco Malfoy, he said. Harry Potter, Harry said. Those are your names. Do you want compartment space or were you planning to stand in the doorway? Draco blinked. He had clearly expected something else, deference, maybe, or the reverse, the defensive performance of someone establishing themselves. He had not expected simple practicality. He came in and sat down, the 2 large ones arranged themselves outside in the corridor, and Hermione made a small noise that communicated her entire opinion of Draco's suitability as company and returned to her book. Asgard, Draco said. You actually live there. Yes. My father says you've been raised by Loki Odinson. Among others. He says Loki Odinson is, Draco paused, visibly editing something. Extremely dangerous. He's the smartest person I know, said Harry. Which makes him dangerous, yes. But primarily to people who deserve it. Draco considered this. And the goddess of death. Hela. Your father says, my father, Draco said, slightly too quickly, says a lot of things. He stopped. Restarted. What's she actually like? Precise, Harry said. Completely honest. The most capable fighter I've ever faced. He paused. She doesn't waste words or time. If she's talking to you, it's because she's decided you're worth the words. And if she decides you're not, then you don't see her coming, said Harry simply. Draco was quiet for a moment. He was, Harry had decided, genuinely intelligent, the kind that had been flattered toward arrogance but hadn't lost the underlying capability that would make it worth redirecting. There was something accessible there. Something that could be interesting. Your father follows Voldemort, Harry said. Draco went rigid in a way that told Harry everything about which conversations were allowed at Malfoy Manor. That's not an accusation, Harry said. Information. I'm establishing what I know so we can have an honest conversation instead of a performed one. He held Draco's gaze. I don't care about your family's politics. I care about whether you're worth talking to. Are you? A long silence. The train moved through countryside outside the window, late afternoon light going amber across the seats. Probably, Draco said finally, and it sounded grudgingly honest in a way that was the first genuinely unperformed thing he'd said since appearing in the doorway. Harry nodded and returned to his book. Good, he said. Then come back when you have something worth saying. Draco left. The two large ones followed him. Hermione waited until the door was shut and then looked at Harry over the top of her book. That was either very smart or very reckless, she said. The two overlap significantly, said Harry, and she laughed, and that was, more or less, the beginning of a friendship. Hogwarts at night, seen from the boats across the lake, was the kind of sight that reorganized whatever internal hierarchy of impressive things you'd assembled up to that point. Harry had grown up looking at Asgard's palace, which was beautiful in the way of things designed specifically to communicate power and permanence. Hogwarts was beautiful differently, not designed so much as accumulated, grown like a thing that had been adding to itself over centuries in whatever direction seemed necessary, all towers and battlements and lit windows and the sense of something genuinely alive in its stones. Harry looked at it from the boat and felt something he wasn't immediately sure how to categorize. Not awe. Something quieter. Like recognition of a specific kind, the recognition of a place that had been part of him before he'd ever seen it. Hermione was in the next boat with two other students, looking at the castle with her chin up and an expression that was trying to be composed and not quite managing it. Even she, for all her preparedness, was not completely armored against this. Good, Harry thought. It should affect you. Things that have centuries of intention in their stones should register. The sorting ceremony was in the great hall, which was large and alive with floating candles and the four long house tables and the high ceiling that was doing something interesting with illusion work, showing a cloudy autumn sky that Harry spent a moment genuinely analyzing before he redirected his attention to the front of the room. Professor McGonagall was exactly what her reputation in the books suggested, exact, competent, the kind of precise that came from genuine capability rather than performance. She had the look of someone who managed expectations by never failing to meet the highest ones. Harry filed her under respect immediately, which was a short list. The sorting hat was on its stool at the front of the hall, looking like what it was, an ancient, enchanted artifact of considerable magical depth, and when Professor McGonagall unrolled the scroll of first-year names and the ceremony began, Harry watched each sorting with the particular attention he brought to learning new systems. The hat took varying amounts of time. Some sortings were immediate. Others took a minute or more. The hat stalls, he knew from his reading, the ones where the student had qualities that made the assignment genuinely complex. He noted which students those were and filed them separately. Potter, Harry. The hall's noise dropped immediately and completely, like something had cut the sound. It was a genuinely impressive silence, the kind that came from a name carrying more weight than its owner was present in the room to balance yet. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat was placed on his head. It went quiet in the external way. Then, inside, oh. The hat's voice was old, much older than most things Harry had encountered, which was saying something. It had a quality of having processed an extraordinary number of people and developed from that a comprehensive understanding of human nature. It sounded, in his head, like a very experienced scholar who had been mildly startled. I haven't felt anything like this in, a pause. Actually, I'm not certain I've felt anything like this at all. You have Gryffindor courage and Ravenclaw intellect and Slytherin, well, Slytherin everything, really, and something else that doesn't correspond to any of the Founder's categories. I'm aware, Harry thought back. You've been informed of your nature. Partly. I'm still researching. Yes, I imagine you would be. The hat seemed to be doing something, not choosing exactly, but examining something more fundamental than house compatibility. The question of where to put you is genuinely interesting. The Founders designed the categories for Hogwarts students. You are a Hogwarts student in the same way that a river is water, technically accurate, significantly incomplete. Where do you think I belong? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Everywhere, the hat said. Which is not helpful for my purposes. A pause. What do you want? Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want from this place? Harry thought about it honestly. Understanding, he said. The wizarding world is part of what I am. I want to understand it from the inside. Gryffindor, the hat said, and it sounded like a decision made for specific reasons rather than category fit. Because the other houses would make you comfortable. Gryffindor will challenge you. And you, a hint of something almost like humor in its ancient voice. You need challenging more than you need comfort. Gryffindor, the hat said aloud, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off and set it back on the stool and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and the students around him were enthusiastic in the way of people who had been anticipating something significant and felt validated by its arrival. He noticed two things. 1. Dumbledore at the head table was watching him with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for this moment and was now engaged in the rapid recalculation of whatever prior model he'd been working with. 2. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him with the expression of someone who was privately reconsidering a significant number of things and wasn't sure yet what he thought about the conclusions. Harry made a small mental note about both. The classes were interesting in the way that encountering a completely different system for doing something familiar was always interesting. Charms with Flitwick was the first revelation. Flitwick was a genuine expert, the kind who had moved past the point of performing expertise into simply being it, and his teaching methodology was better than Harry had expected. The Wingardium Leviosa lesson that every first year apparently started with was a vehicle for introducing the fundamental principle of magical focus through intention. Harry understood the principle in approximately 3 minutes and spent the rest of the lesson watching how the other students' magic moved through their wands, building a picture of Midgardian wandwork mechanics from observation. He levitated the feather on the first attempt. Flitwick made a small sound of surprised pleasure. Hermione levitated hers on the second attempt and looked faintly competitive about it, which Harry found entertaining. "You did that rather easily," Hermione said afterward. "The principle is consistent with things I already know," said Harry. "The wand is new, but the underlying mechanism, directing intention through a focal point, that's familiar. What's the difference between doing it with a wand and without?" "Precision in certain contexts," he said. "The wand provides a direction that makes fine control easier at the cost of some flexibility. Without a focal tool, you have to provide both the power and the direction yourself, which at higher levels of complexity means more things to manage simultaneously." Hermione looked at him with the expression she'd been developing since the train, the one that said she was building a model of him and updating it frequently. "Can you do things without a wand?" "Yes," Harry said. "Can you show me?" He held out his hand, palm up, and the small flame appeared, blue-white, the thing that wasn't seer, the thing from the space between intention and result, and Hermione looked at it with the expression of someone encountering data that their existing frameworks required significant expansion to accommodate. "That's not any Midgardian magic I've read about," she said. "No," said Harry. "It's something else. I'm still working out the full mechanics. Can I help?" She said it quickly, like she'd been holding it and had decided to release it before she talked herself out of it. Harry looked at her. She was, he'd decided, exactly the kind of person she appeared to be, no gap between the surface and what was underneath, all genuine interest and genuine effort, with the particular kind of brightness that came from finding the world consistently more interesting than expected. Completely honest in a way that made her occasionally sharp-edged but never deliberately cruel. "Yes," he said. "That would actually be useful." Transfiguration with McGonagall was the second revelation, and this one was more personal. McGonagall turned her desk into a pig and back again at the start of the lesson, which Harry appreciated as a teaching methodology: lead with demonstration, establish the gap between current ability and potential, let the student use the gap as motivation. It was exactly how Loki structured complicated seer lessons. She went through the theory with precision and set them to transforming matches into needles. Harry looked at the match for a moment, ran the principle through what he already knew about transfiguration versus seer. Transfiguration here was genuinely different, a more fundamental alteration of material structure rather than seer's redirection of energy, and made the attempt. The match became a needle. Fully, cleanly, immediately. McGonagall stopped mid-circuit of the desks. She came to stand next to Harry and looked at the needle and then at him with an expression that was trying to be merely observant but had something else in it, a kind of professional recognition. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor. Have you studied transfiguration before?" "Not specifically," he said. "I know Asgardian seer and some broader magical theory. I've read the textbook." She looked at the needle. Turned it over on his desk. It was a perfect needle, not just visually transformed but structurally accurate, the kind of transfiguration that usually took weeks to achieve at first-year level. "Do it again," she said. Deliberately. "I want to see the process." Harry took a second match from the box and held it and went through the process slowly enough to be observed, the seer framework he'd built for structural analysis, the Midgardian principle of material intention he'd drawn from the textbook, and then underneath both of those, the older thing, the confluence, the point where he could feel the match's current state and its possible states simultaneously and ask rather than force the shift. The second needle appeared. Slightly better than the first. McGonagall looked at it for a moment and then said, in a voice that was perfectly composed, 5 points to Gryffindor, and moved on. After class, as students were filing out, she said without turning from the board she was clearing, "Mr. Potter." A moment. Harry waited while the others left. Hermione gave him a significant look on her way out that communicated both curiosity and confidence in his ability to handle whatever this was. McGonagall turned around and looked at him directly. She had the straight-backed, clear-eyed quality of someone who had made a decision about honesty. "I was your parents' head of house," she said. "I know," said Harry. "I knew your mother and father well. I was present at Godric's Hollow, not during, but after." A pause. "You look like your father. You have your mother's eyes." She said it factually rather than sentimentally. "I want you to know that the staff of this school, most of us, have been, anticipating your arrival for some time." "I know that too," said Harry. "I noticed the headmaster watching the sorting." Something in McGonagall's expression shifted at that, a small reassessment. "Yes," she said. "He has been, invested in your situation for some time. I would advise," she paused again, choosing her words. "I would advise that you give him the opportunity to form his own impressions before assuming you understand his intentions." "I don't assume anything about anyone's intentions," said Harry. "I observe and conclude. And I'm still observing." McGonagall looked at him for another moment. "Fair enough," she said. "You may go." Harry went, and in the corridor he found Hermione waiting with her arms folded and her expression asking a question she was deciding whether to voice. "She cared about my parents," he said. "She wanted me to know she was watching out for me. And she wanted me to give Dumbledore the benefit of the doubt." He paused. "She's honest and well-intentioned and has slightly less information about the situation than she thinks she does." "And Dumbledore is going to want to talk to me soon," said Harry. "And we'll have a version of events prepared that he believes is complete." He started walking. "I want to go to the library before dinner." Potions with Snape was the third revelation, and this one was less professional and more personal in a direction Harry found genuinely interesting. Snape arrived in the dungeon classroom with the particular entrance style of someone who had perfected the art of the room going quiet before you asked it to, black robes, the absolute economy of someone who had stripped every unnecessary thing from their presence, and launched directly into a speech about the subtle science and exact art of potion-making that was honestly the most sophisticated introduction to a discipline Harry had heard from any Hogwarts teacher so far. Then Snape looked at Harry. He held it for a moment, held it the way a person holds something they've been carrying for a long time and are finally putting down. Then he said, "Potter. Our new celebrity." Harry said nothing. "Tell me," Snape said, moving between desks, voice carrying the particular quality of someone asking questions they believe will expose inadequacy, "what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "The draught of living death," said Harry. "A sleeping potion of extraordinary power." The name is poetic, it mimics death at the cellular level while preserving life functions below diagnostic threshold. A pause. Where did you find that? Most Patendi potions, Harry said. Third shelf from the top in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, which I visited this morning. The recipe is on page 212. The classroom had gone very quiet. Hermione was making a face that suggested she was experiencing something she didn't have immediate language for. Snape looked at him. The restricted section requires teacher permission. Professor Flitwick gave me a note after charms, said Harry. He said my questions about advanced charm theory suggested I'd benefit from broader research access. Another pause. What is a bezoar? A stone found in the stomach of a goat, Harry said. It acts as a universal antidote to most poisons by absorbing and neutralizing toxic compounds at the gastric level. The mechanism was partially decoded by the Asgardian healer Aer in the 8th century and later confirmed by European alchemists who worked from the same foundational principles without knowing the original source. Snape's eyes narrowed. You're claiming knowledge of Asgardian alchemy. I'm not claiming anything, said Harry. I'm answering your questions. The thing with Snape, and Harry had decided this in the first 10 minutes of observing him, was that the hostility was not simple. It had layers, and underneath the layers was someone whose intelligence was genuine and considerable and who had been consistently underestimated or misestimated by the people around him, which had produced the particular kind of sharp edges that came from protecting something worth protecting. Harry recognized it because it was, to a degree, a version of something he'd seen in Loki. Carefully, precisely managed bitterness in service of continued function. You knew my mother, Harry said, very quietly, when Snape came to stand beside his desk to observe his potion work. Not loudly enough for the class to hear. Not as an accusation. Snape went still. I've read her notes, Harry said, continuing to work on the potion without looking up. She was brilliant. The theory she developed on protective magic, the redirectional bonding principle, it's some of the most innovative wand work I've encountered. He paused. She deserved more time. He could feel Snape standing beside his desk without moving for longer than any desk check warranted. Your potion is correct, Snape said eventually, in a voice stripped of everything except the observation itself. He moved on. Harry let out a breath he hadn't been aware of holding. The week settled into rhythm, and the rhythm was interesting. Harry went to classes and went to the library and wrote long letters to Loki and shorter, denser ones to Hela, and moved through Hogwarts with the unhurried attention of someone for whom the whole enterprise was a research project he was invested in. Quirrell was a problem he noticed in the first week. The defense against the dark arts teacher had a stammer and a turban and a reputation for being terrified of everything, which was the kind of cover story that worked on people who weren't paying close attention to the discrepancy between what a person projected and what they actually radiated. What Quirrell radiated was wrong. Dark in a specific way that Harry had spent 6 years learning to feel around Hela, who was darkness of the right kind, the honest and ancient kind that came from genuine authority over genuine things. What came off Quirrell was darkness of the wrong kind, borrowed, layered, something wearing something else's architecture. Harry said nothing about it to anyone for 2 weeks. He observed. In the third week, Quirrell let his attention rest on Harry in class for 3 seconds too long, and in that 3 seconds Harry felt something reach out toward him, tentative, probing, the magical equivalent of a hand through a dark doorway, and he let it find nothing but the surface of him, the controlled outer presentation, and sent back nothing except calm. In the corridor afterward, Hermione fell into step beside him. Quirrell was staring at you again, she said. I know, said Harry. It's strange. He looks frightened, said Harry. And something underneath the frightened that isn't Quirrell. He glanced at her. What do you know about Voldemort's current state? I know he was destroyed, or partially. But a killing curse that bounces back doesn't necessarily destroy the caster. It depends on what preparations they made. Hermione's eyes went wide and then sharply focused. Horcruxes, she said. You've read about them. They're in one of the restricted section books. Well, they're alluded to, most of the actual information is sealed. I found 2 texts that weren't sealed, said Harry. The sealing was applied uniformly to certain sections but missed lateral references in historical accounts. He paused. He split his soul. Multiple times, probably. Which means whatever came back off Godric's Hollow that night was a fragment, and that fragment is currently inside this school. Hermione stopped walking. Inside, sharing Quirrell, said Harry. The turban covers the back of his head. I'd estimate whatever form it's taken is attached there. He started walking again. Which means whatever's in the dungeons that Dumbledore has under guard is what it's here for. And it's been here since September. We should tell someone, Hermione said. Dumbledore knows, said Harry. He has the object under protection and he's watching the situation. He's using it. He paused. I'm not sure yet what he's using it for, exactly, bait, possibly, or a test of something. But he knows. Hermione stared at him. You're not angry about that? I'm forming a view, said Harry. It requires more information. The Mirror of Erist was in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor that Harry found not by accident but by following the particular quality of magic that pulsed from it, a specific frequency he'd noticed twice moving past the corridor and had decided, on the 3rd occasion, to locate the source. It was enormous. Taller than he was, gold-framed, the inscription along the top reading in a cipher that he decoded in about a minute, I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it at 2 in the morning, under the invisibility cloak he'd found in his trunk on Christmas morning with a note in handwriting he didn't recognize saying only your father's. Use it well, and he looked at what the mirror showed him. He had expected his parents. That's what the story said, orphans saw their families. Lost people saw what they'd lost. The mirror showed him a room. It was the library in Loki's chambers on Asgard, the one he'd grown up in, the one with the blue-green fire and the overfull shelves and the big table covered in research and the windows showing Asgard's gold outside. It showed him at the table, older, with Loki across from him and Hela standing at the window, and they were, not doing anything dramatic. Just existing in the same space. Loki reading something and making notes in the margin. Hela at the window. Harry at the table, his hands on a book, looking up at both of them with an expression that the mirror Harry had and the Real Harry recognized as the thing that lived underneath everything else. Not the power. Not the training. Not the magic and the strategy and the research. Just, here, and known, and not going anywhere. Harry stood in front of the mirror for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't perform the moment. He just looked at it and felt its full weight and then said to himself, quietly, I have that. I already have that. And the wanting it that the mirror reflected was not loss but something more complicated, the awareness that the thing you need most is the thing you're most afraid of losing, and the mirror was showing him not an absence but a presence so significant it registered as desire. He turned away from the mirror and walked back through the dark corridors with the cloak over his shoulders and the jade disc warm against his chest. Dumbledore found him 3 days later. Not summoned, found, as in Harry rounded a corner on the 7th floor and the headmaster was walking in his direction with the particular quality of someone whose path had been arranged in advance by their own design. Mr. Potter, Dumbledore said. A word, perhaps. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore was, considerable. There was no other word for it. His power was not the loud kind, not the kind that preceded itself and made rooms go quiet. It was the quiet kind, the kind that had been doing things for so long that it didn't need to announce itself because everything in the vicinity already knew it was there. His eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were very sharp and very warm in combination, and Harry recognized the combination as something Dumbledore had cultivated deliberately, the warmth to make you lower your guard, the sharpness to observe what that revealed. Of course, said Harry. They walked. Not to the office, Dumbledore chose the corridor, the open space, which was either a choice to seem casual or a choice to avoid the home ground advantage of the office. Harry wasn't sure which yet. "I understand you've been making good progress in your studies," Dumbledore said. "Yes. Your professors speak very highly of you. Professor Flitwick called your understanding of charm theory architecturally novel, which from Phileas is quite significant praise." He paused. Professor Snape made no comment, which in his case I have learned to interpret as grudging admiration. Harry said nothing. "I imagine Hogwarts feels quite different from Asgard," Dumbledore said. "Different, yes," said Harry. "Smaller. More immediate. The concerns of one school in one country on one planet as opposed to the concerns of 9 realms." He paused. "But more concentrated. There's something interesting about a small space where a lot of significant things are happening simultaneously." "A diplomatic answer," said Dumbledore, and his eyes were warm and sharp in equal measure. "An honest one," said Harry. "May I ask?" Dumbledore stopped walking and turned to look at Harry directly, which Harry appreciated. "How much do you know about what's in this school? About what Professor Quirrell is carrying?" Harry met his gaze. "Enough," he said. "And you haven't acted?" "No. It wasn't time." He paused. "I've been watching. And I've been waiting to understand what you're doing with it, because it's clear you know and it's clear you haven't moved, which means you're either waiting for something specific or you're using it as a test." A silence. Dumbledore's expression did something, the warmth shifted, became something else. Not displeasure. Something closer to respect, accompanied by the particular unease of someone whose plan has been seen through by someone they've been planning around. "Both," said Dumbledore. "To a degree." "What are you testing?" said Harry. "Whether you were what I thought you might be," Dumbledore said honestly. "And whether you needed help." "Do you think I do?" Harry asked. A pause. "Then, I think," said Dumbledore carefully, "that you are more prepared for what's in this school than I anticipated. I also think that what's in this school is only the beginning, and that the person behind it, the remnant of him, has intentions that extend significantly past one object in a dungeon." "I know," said Harry. "I've been reading." "About Horcruxes." "About Horcruxes," Harry confirmed. "About Tom Riddle. About what he was before he became what he is." He looked at Dumbledore. "He was afraid of death. Specifically and personally. And he did extraordinary, terrible things to try to escape it." He paused. "I find that interesting." "How so?" "Because I was raised by the goddess of death," said Harry. "And what she taught me is that death is not the enemy. Indifference is." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. He was afraid of the wrong thing. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment something in his expression did something that Harry thought, afterward, was the most honest thing he'd shown yet. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "I rather think he was." Chapter 5, The Philosopher's Stone and the God Beneath It. The trap door was on the 3rd floor, behind a locked door that Hermione had been cataloguing with the focused intensity she brought to anything she'd decided was important. Harry had been aware of it since October. He had been aware of the progression of whatever Quirrell was doing since November, when the attempted robbery of Gringotts, which Loki had mentioned in a letter with the understated tone of someone noting a development they'd already anticipated, confirmed that what was under the school was what the fragment wanted, and that it was getting bolder. In December, Quirrell's probing had become more purposeful. In January, the quality of the darkness Harry could feel behind the stammer and the turban had changed, less tentative, more directed. By March, Harry had written to Loki with a specific question, received the answer 4 days later in a letter that had also contained 3 pages of additional context he hadn't asked for but needed, and had spent the following 2 weeks making decisions. The night it happened, he had known it would happen before Hermione knocked on the dormitory door at 11 with her hair wild and her face set to determined. "Quirrell's going," she said, without preamble. "I was in the library and I heard him on the staircase, moving fast. The enchantment's on the corridor. I checked the third floor and the door's been opened. I know, said Harry. He was already dressed. She looked at him. At the wand at his right wrist and the knife at his left and the jade disc at his collar. You were waiting. I was ready, he said. There's a difference. Waiting implies a passive state. He pulled the invisibility cloak from under his bed. Come if you want. You don't have to. Hermione looked at him with the expression she'd been perfecting all year, the one that was simultaneously exasperated and fully committed. Obviously I'm coming, she said. The third-floor corridor was empty and the door to the staircase was open and the Cerberus beyond it, which Harry had looked at briefly in September through the door's keyhole, taken a measurement of, and filed under interesting but manageable, was asleep. Not naturally. Harp music still drifted from the far corner, thin and mechanical, a small enchanted instrument playing itself to an increasingly somnolent audience of 3 massive heads. Harry went first, down through the open trap door, Hermione after him. The Devil's Snare was next. It reached for them immediately with the enthusiastic thoroughness of a plant that had been waiting for something to grab. Harry felt it wind around his wrist and sent a calm, even warmth through the contact, not fire exactly, more like concentrated sunlight, the magic finding the plant's specific relationship with light and amplifying it until the snare drew back with something that, if plants had feelings, would have been reluctant resignation. How did you? Hermione started. Plants have a relationship with light built into their structure, Harry said. The snare avoids it. I just made the avoidance more immediate. He looked at her. You're fine. I know I'm fine, she said, slightly crisp. I was asking about the methodology. They kept moving. The flying keys were in the next chamber, a massive, high room full of hundreds of winged keys circling in the air above 2 broomsticks, the enchanted lock on the far door sitting in the center of all that chaotic movement. Harry looked at it for a moment. The keys were an elegant puzzle for someone working within standard wizarding methodology. You had to locate the specific key, pursue it, catch it, use it before others interfered. Harry looked at the mass of circling keys and reached into the space between intention and result and found the specific resonance of the correct key, the one tuned to the lock, the one carrying the right frequency, among all the others, the way you found a single voice in a crowd by listening for the particular pitch of someone you knew. The key flew into his hand. Hermione stared. I can feel which one matches, he said. It's a frequency thing. Each lock and key in a system like this are paired, they have a resonance between them. The matched pair vibrates at the same rate. He unlocked the door. Come on. You're going to have to teach me all of this, Hermione said, following him through. That's a long curriculum, said Harry. I'll make a schedule, she said immediately, and he almost smiled. The chess board was in the third chamber, and it was enormous, the pieces the height of small adults, the board running the full width of the room. White pieces on the far side. A set of black pieces on theirs, waiting. Harry stood at the edge of the board and looked at it for a moment. Chess is, Hermione started. I know chess, said Harry. He did. Loki had taught him chess at age 7, not the standard form, but the form Loki played, which was the version where the primary objective was not to win but to force your opponent into a position where winning became irrelevant because you'd already restructured the entire framework of the game. He'd been taught that victory was less interesting than control of positioning, of options, of the narrative of the board. He walked to the side of the board and looked at the placement of the white pieces and the position of the black ones and spent 40 seconds doing the relevant calculations. Then he moved the black knight to a position that wasn't an attack and wasn't a defense but was a redirection, a move that opened 3 specific lanes while appearing to open one, that invited 3 specific responses from the white pieces, each of which would be correct within standard strategy and each of which would create a compounding disadvantage that the white pieces wouldn't fully register for 4 moves. The white pieces moved as predicted. 6 moves later, the white queen was boxed without having been engaged, the king was in a position from which no rescue was structurally possible, and the board recognized it and went still. Check, Harry said. And made in two. Hermione looked at the board and then at Harry. Loki taught you chess. He taught me the version of chess where you win before your opponent understands what's happening, said Harry. He considers it a fundamental life skill. She paused. Actually, that's a reasonable philosophy. She looked at the door on the far side. What's next? Harry had read the original design notes, or as close as he could get, from Dumbledore's papers and the history Hermione had assembled from the library. A potion challenge, he said. Logic puzzle. Flamel and Dumbledore's contribution, and then the stone itself. He paused. Hermione. I need you to go back. Absolutely not. Not because I don't trust you, he said. Because someone needs to go to Dumbledore and tell him what's happening here. And you can do that faster than I can while I deal with whatever's in the next room. He looked at her directly. I'm not asking you to leave because it's dangerous. I'm asking you because it's tactically necessary. Dumbledore needs to know tonight, and you're the best person to make him understand the full picture quickly. Hermione stared at him. She was doing the calculation, he could see her doing it, the frustration of the conclusion competing with the accuracy of the reasoning. You can handle what's in there, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said simply. And you're not just saying that. I've never just said anything to you, Harry said. A pause. Then she nodded, once, with the decisive quality she brought to good decisions. Be careful anyway. I'm always careful. You flew a broom last month at 200 feet without your hands on the handle to catch a remembrance someone had deliberately knocked away, she said. That was controlled, said Harry. It looked extremely uncontrolled from where I was standing. Most things look uncontrolled from the outside, he said. Go. She went, moving fast, the purposeful stride of someone with a mission and the intellectual equipment to execute it. Harry turned to the door and went through. The potion chamber was small and dark and smelled of age and the particular quality of a room where significant things had been kept for a long time. The flames in the doorways, purple behind him, black ahead, were already lit, which meant Quirrell had been through. The potions were on the table in a row, 7 bottles, different shapes, different contents, the logic puzzle Snape had designed, its solution encoded in a poem on a piece of paper that Harry read once and processed completely in approximately the time it took him to walk to the table. He picked up the correct small bottle, the one that allowed passage forward through the black flames, and looked at it for a moment. It was cold in his hand. Clever, genuinely, the puzzle design, purely logical, no magic would solve it, only thought. He drank it and stepped through the black flames. The room beyond was the last one, and it was large and lit and dominated by the mirror of Eriste, which stood in the center of it the way it had stood in the unused classroom on the 3rd floor, enormous, gold-framed, waiting. Quirrell was standing in front of it with his back to the door, and the wrongness Harry had been feeling all year was fully present now, not filtered through the performance of the terrified professor but simply there, layered and dark and with the specific quality of something that had lost too much of itself and was trying to reconstruct from diminished materials. I wondered when you'd come, Quirrell said. His stammer was gone. He turned around, and his eyes were different, steadier, colder, carrying something that wasn't Quirrell's architecture. You've been here all year, said Harry. I've been waiting for you to commit. Quirrell looked at him. The assessment in his gaze was different from what Harry had expected. More intelligent. More specific. You feel it, he said. Don't you? Through me. The fragment. Yes, said Harry. It feels you too, Quirrell said. It has since September. He tilted his head, the movement slightly wrong in the way of something wearing a body that wasn't entirely its own. You're not afraid. No, said Harry. You should be, said Quirrell. Even reduced as I am, even in this state, you're a fragment of a soul, Harry said, pleasantly, the way he'd discuss a theoretical problem over breakfast. You've attached yourself to a living host whose body is degrading under the attachment. You can't touch me directly because my mother's magic is still in my skin. You felt that in September, I assume, when you sent the probe and it came back wrong. He walked slowly to the side, not toward Quirrell, a lateral movement that began rearranging the geometry of the room. You've been trying to figure out a way around it all year. Quirrell, the fragment, watched him move. You're remarkably well informed for 11 years old. I'm not really 11 in any way that matters, said Harry. I've been alive for 11 years. I've been studying for most of them. Who are you? The fragment said, and it said it with genuine curiosity underneath the dark layers, the real question rather than the tactical one. Harry Potter, said Harry. And what I am underneath that doesn't have a tidy name yet. But you know that. That's why you've been afraid to approach directly. The thing in Quirrell said nothing. Voldemort, Harry said. I want to talk to you. Not to Quirrell. Through him, I know, but to you. A pause. Then something changed in Quirrell's posture, a shift, like two different currents in the same water moving differently. You're calling me by name, said the voice, and it was not Quirrell's voice at all now. Higher, colder, with the particular quality of something that had stripped itself of everything human in pursuit of longevity and was only now registering what it had paid. Everyone else is afraid of your name, said Harry. I'm not afraid of names. Names are information. He stopped moving, stood still, about 15 feet from Quirrell, and looked directly at him. I know about the Horcruxes. I know about the soul-splitting. I know about the night you came to Godric's Hollow and what my mother did and what happened to you afterward. He paused. I also know about Tom Riddle. The boy before all the rest. Quirrell's face did something complicated. Don't, said the voice. Why not? He existed. Whatever you've done with him, he was real. Harry's voice was level. Not cruel, not deliberately provoking, simply holding the space open. He was afraid of death. Specifically, physically, personally afraid. And instead of understanding what death actually was, he treated it as an enemy to be defeated. It is an enemy, the voice said. No, said Harry. It isn't. I know this with more authority than you do, because I was raised by the person who governs it. Death is a boundary. Like any boundary, what you do with it depends on whether you understand it or simply fear it. He watched the thing in Quirrell's eyes. You fear it. So you split your soul and made yourself monstrous and killed people who didn't deserve it and made everyone around you afraid and alone, and after all of that, you're still here, fragmented and reduced and sharing a borrowed body and trying to steal a stone. He paused. Does that seem like a successful approach to you? Silence. Give me the stone, the voice said. Not a request. A test. The stone, said Harry, is going to require some discussion. He looked at the mirror of Eriste behind Quirrell and thought about what Dumbledore had said, about desire, about what the mirror showed, about Flamel's protection being built on the principle that only someone who wanted to find but not use the stone could retrieve it from the mirror. He'd thought about that principle for weeks. Turned it over. Tested it against everything he knew about want and power and the difference between them. He stepped forward and walked toward the mirror, and Quirrell moved to stop him, fast, decisive, the fragment deciding that whatever approach Harry was taking needed to be terminated, and Harry turned to meet the grab and redirected it, a clean movement, Hela's training in every line of it, and Quirrell's hand touched his arm instead of gripping it and, the scream was immediate and completely involuntary. Quirrell pulled back with the expression of someone whose hand had been placed on something that was burning below the register of visible flame. His palm was reddening, the skin pulling back from something. My mother's magic, Harry said. Not triumphantly. Just naming the mechanism. Still in my skin. You felt that in September. The probe. He looked at Quirrell's hand. You can't touch me. That's, Quirrell's voice was back, stammer and all, and the overlap of the two of them in it was fracturing. That's impossible. That protection should have faded years. It doesn't fade, said Harry. It's not a ward. It's a fundamental alteration of my magical structure. She didn't cast a spell on me. She changed what I am. He turned back to the mirror and stood in front of it. The mirror showed him the same thing it had always shown him. The library. Loki. Hela. The room where he was known. And in his reflection's hand, the stone. He reached into the space between intention and result, the confluence, the meeting place, and asked, simply and directly, the same way he asked anything that understood the language he used most fluently, here. I see you. I'm not here to use you. I'm here to understand you. The stone's warmth appeared in his pocket. He felt it the moment it arrived, the same full map sensation as in the vault, every boundary in the 9 realms simultaneously present, the outline of everything that divided anything from everything else. He didn't reach for that sensation. He let it be there and left it alone. I have it, he said, to Quirrell and to the voice behind Quirrell. Quirrell flung himself forward. What happened next was fast enough that the description afterward took longer than the event itself. Quirrell moved and Harry moved and the fragment tried to direct Quirrell's hands toward Harry's throat and every touch produced the same burning reaction, which didn't stop the fragment from trying but did mean each attempt was costing something it couldn't afford to spend. Harry didn't attack. He kept redirecting, kept moving, kept the geometry of the room between them, and the fragment was increasingly frantic because this, a target that couldn't be touched and wouldn't run, was a situation it had no established framework for. The stone was warm in his pocket and the boundaries of the realms were present in the back of his consciousness like a map he could feel, and Harry thought, very clearly, this is what you are. This is what you spent everything to become. A fragment, burning your host, unable to touch the person you came here to destroy. He stopped moving. Quirrell came at him fully, both hands, the fragment abandoning strategy for sheer force of will, and Harry held his ground and let Quirrell's hands close around his arms and the reaction was immediate and complete, not burning now but something deeper, the contact between something that had done terrible violence to its own soul and the point where every magical channel in every realm met and had, apparently, opinions about that. Quirrell screamed. The fragment screamed through Quirrell, a different sound, higher, something tearing rather than burning. And the stone in Harry's pocket pulsed, once, with the warm authority of something that knew exactly what it was made of, and Harry felt the boundary between Quirrell and the fragment become clear, felt the exact seam where the attachment was, the wound where the soul fragment had grafted itself, and without deciding to, without planning it, he simply held that seam still for one moment. The fragment separated. Not gracefully. Not cleanly. Like something being peeled away from what it had been trying to make itself part of, the fragment detached from Quirrell with the quality of something forced to exist in its own shape rather than someone else's, and Quirrell collapsed and the thing that was not Quirrell was briefly, horribly present in the room, shapeless, formless, the pure remnant of a person who had made themselves into a near-nothing, and then it was moving, moving past him, moving toward the door and away, and Harry turned to watch it go. He didn't pursue. He crouched down beside Quirrell instead. The man was alive. The host body, freed from what had been living in it, was already settling into something more like itself. The degradation would reverse, partially, if he got medical attention quickly. His breath was shallow but present, his pulse erratic but there. Harry looked at him for a moment. Quirrell had been afraid. That was the whole story, really, another person afraid of the wrong thing, or afraid in the wrong direction, and that fear had opened a door that the fragment had walked through and taken up residence in until there was barely a Quirrell left underneath it. "You'll be all right," Harry said, which was possibly optimistic but felt like the right thing to say to someone who had just been unexpectedly vacated. He stood up. The stone was still warm in his pocket. He took it out and looked at it in the room's lamplight, ordinary looking, impossible, made of the boundary between one state and another, the same substance as the walls of the vault at Gringotts. He was still looking at it when Dumbledore arrived. The headmaster came through the door with the quality of someone moving fast who had the composure to look measured anyway, and he stopped when he saw Harry standing in the middle of the room with the stone in his hand and Quirrell unconscious at his feet and the mirror of Erist quiet and unreflective behind him. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. "The fragment?" Dumbledore said. "Gone. Through the door, maybe 10 minutes ago. The direction was east, toward the mountains, I think, if it was going anywhere with intention. It can't possess anything immediately. The separation was abrupt. It'll need time to regroup." Dumbledore looked at Quirrell. Crouched, checked his pulse, stood back up. He looked at the stone in Harry's hand. "How did you retrieve it from the mirror?" he said. "I didn't want to use it," Harry said. "I wanted to understand it." He paused. "Which is different from not wanting it." "I wanted it very much. But wanting to understand something and wanting to use it for yourself are different kinds of desire, and the mirror, apparently, distinguishes between them." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You knew about the mirror's function." "I worked it out," Harry said. "From what you told me about it in November, and from thinking about how Flamel would have designed the protection." "You've been thinking about this since November." "I've been thinking about most of it since September," said Harry. "When I first felt the fragment in Quirrell." He looked at the stone again. "This needs to go back to Nicholas Flamel. And then," he paused. "And then I think he needs to let it go." Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. "You understand what that means for Nicholas? He's 665 years old," Harry said. "He's been alive because of the stone, not because of who he is. There's a difference." He closed his fingers around the stone. "I need to talk to you about Horcruxes. Specifically about how many there are and where they are." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "All of them. Not the version you tell an 11-year-old. The full picture." Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment, and the sharpness behind the warm eyes was fully present, undisguised, doing its real work. "How much do you already know?" he said. "Enough to tell you that your current plan involves a significant risk you haven't fully accounted for," said Harry. "And I'd rather we accounted for it now, before the fragment has time to find a new host and come back with a more prepared approach." A silence. Outside the room, beyond the enchantments, Hogwarts went about its nighttime routines, the castle breathing, the stones carrying 600 years of intention. "I think," said Dumbledore, very quietly, "that I owe you a considerably more honest conversation than I had prepared." "Yes," said Harry. "You do." He didn't sleep that night. Not because he was upset, or not only because of that, but because the conversation with Dumbledore in the hospital wing, conducted in low voices over Quirrell's unconscious form while Madame Pomfrey performed diagnostics with the focused calm of someone who had seen a great deal and learned to manage it, had given him enough new information that sleep felt like a waste. 7 Horcruxes. The diary. The ring. The locket. The cup. The diadem. The snake. And, Dumbledore's voice very quiet, very careful, possibly one more, made accidentally, on the night at Godric's Hollow. Possibly in Harry himself. Harry had held that piece of information the way you held something hot, carefully, without gripping. He'd asked Dumbledore how certain he was. Not certain, Dumbledore had said. But it would explain a great deal about your particular connection to him. The scar. The ability to feel the fragment's presence at Quirrell. The way the protection manifested differently in you than it should have in a normal survivor. Harry had thought about this. "If there's a fragment of his soul in me," he'd said, "it would have been there since I was a year old. Growing up alongside everything else." "Yes," Dumbledore had said. "Then it's not separate from me," Harry had said. "It's been part of the confluence since the beginning." Dumbledore had been very quiet at that. "I'll need to think about that," Harry had said. "Give me time to think about it." Elara found him on the tower at dawn, which was where he generally went when he needed altitude and wind and the specific solitude of a high place. She landed on his shoulder with the comfortable ownership of a creature that had decided on its person and wasn't reconsidering. He wrote the letters while the sky changed color. To Loki, everything. The full account, precise, in the cipher that was now second nature to both of them, not for secrecy so much as habit. He included the information about the potential Horcrux and the stone's composition and the conversation with Dumbledore. He included the detail about the fragment separation, how it had happened, what it had felt like, what the stone had done. He asked for the specific volumes from the vault catalog that he thought might address the Horcrux question and for Loki's analysis of the separation event, which he suspected Loki would find theoretically significant. To Hela, shorter, as always. Fragment expelled. Quirrell alive. The stone is going back to Flammel. I'm fine. I may have one of his soul pieces in my scar, not concerned, just aware. Will explain properly when I'm home at term end. Still haven't let anyone disarm me. He tied both to Alara's leg and she went, climbing into the morning air with the purposeful direction of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Harry stood on the tower as Hogwarts woke up below him, the sounds of it, the smell of breakfast from the great hall, the first students beginning to move in the courtyards, and felt the weight of the stone in his pocket and the map of the realms it carried and the older, deeper awareness underneath that, the confluence, the meeting place, present and alive and considerably more informed than it had been yesterday. The fragment was gone but not destroyed. 5 remaining Horcruxes, 6, possibly, if Dumbledore's theory about the scar was correct, and a wizarding world that had been waiting for 10 years for Harry Potter to be old enough to be useful to their particular version of the larger good. He thought about Voldemort in the chamber, the fragment, shapeless and furious and burning every surface it touched, and thought about Tom Riddle before that, the boy afraid of the wrong thing. He didn't feel sorry for him. He felt something more complicated, the awareness that fear, when it's the wrong kind, makes monsters, and that the distance between the boy and the monster was a series of choices each one of which had seemed logical from the inside. And then he thought about Loki, who had been afraid of the wrong things once, and who had chosen differently, slowly, over years, through the particular project of teaching someone else not to repeat the same mistakes. And Hela, who had never been afraid of death because she'd always known exactly what it was. He thought about his mother's notes on the table in the Potter vault and the redirectional bonding principle and what she'd done with love as a literal mechanism, actual functioning magic. He thought about the mirror showing him the library and Loki reading and Hela at the window and that small, complete feeling of being here, and known, and not going anywhere. The stone pulsed once in his pocket. Harry took it out and held it in the early light and looked at it. The substance of the boundary between life and death, sitting in his hand, made 500 years ago by someone who had known what he would be before he existed. He put it carefully in the lead-lined inner pocket of his robes, the one Hela had made into the uniform specifically, without explaining why, in the week before term started, and went down from the tower for breakfast. 3 days later, Hermione found him in the library with the vault catalog and the Potter family notebooks open side by side, a comparison he'd been building for a week. "How are you?" she said, with the directness she'd brought to everything since the chamber. She'd been debriefed by Dumbledore, she'd sat with Quirrell's situation, she'd processed everything that had happened with the focused speed of someone who moved through information faster than most people moved through rooms. "Working," said Harry. "I mean," she sat down. "After the chamber. The thing that was in Quirrell." "I know what you mean," he said. He looked at her. "It was informative. And unpleasant. But not," he paused, finding the honest word. "Not frightening. It was a problem and I solved it and now there are more problems, which is the general nature of problems." "You expelled a fragment of Voldemort's soul from a living host," Hermione said. That's not something that's been done before. I've checked. There's no record of it." "I know," said Harry. "It wasn't planned. The stone did something and he looked for the right word again. Proximate. I was the right kind of thing to be nearby when it happened. The confluence, Hermione said. She'd been building her own model of what Harry was since September, carefully and methodically, referencing texts from 3 different traditions. She said it now the way she said things she'd verified. Yes, said Harry. And Dumbledore thinks there's a piece of Voldemort's soul in your scar. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the composure of someone who had decided that knowing the full truth was always preferable to a comfortable incomplete version. He thinks it's possible, Harry said. I think it's likely. I've been feeling something in the scar since I was old enough to understand what I was feeling. Something that isn't mine. It has a different frequency. He paused. It's been part of my magical structure for 10 years. If it's there, it grew up alongside everything else. What does that mean for getting rid of it? He'd been thinking about this. I don't know yet. Normally destroying a Horcrux requires something of significant power, basilisk venom, fiend fire, things that destroy at the fundamental magical level. Destroying the one in me means destroying whatever it's embedded in. He looked at the vault catalog. There's a theoretical answer in here somewhere. The person who built that vault knew I'd have this problem. They left the stone. The stone is made of the boundary between life and death, which means there might be a way to use that boundary to extract what doesn't belong in a living person without destroying the living person, said Hermione. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. So we need to figure out what the stone actually does. Properly. Beyond just making gold and the elixir of life. Yes, said Harry. Right. She pulled her notebook toward her. I've been cross-referencing the vault catalog script with Proto-Asgardian bardic tradition. I borrowed a text from Professor Flitwick who borrowed it from Professor Dumbledore who apparently had it from a collection of flammels. Harry looked at her. I've been working on this since October, she said. When you told me about the vault. I thought you might need help with the translation and research. She opened the notebook to a page dense with careful, precise notations. I found something 3 weeks ago that I wanted to verify before I said anything. Look. She turned the notebook toward him. The notation at the top of the page was a section of the vault catalog translated into a working equation of magical theory, the kind of work that took most scholars years to produce and that Hermione had apparently done in her spare time between classes. The relevant line, translated and annotated, read, "The boundary substance at rest holds the shape of the division. The boundary substance in motion, at the resonance of the confluence, inverts the division and passes the contained back through itself. What is inside becomes outside. What does not belong is returned to where it belongs." Harry read it twice. It's an extraction mechanism, he said. Built into the stone, said Hermione. Specifically for the confluence. Specifically, for you. She looked at him with her brown eyes very steady. Whoever built that vault was building it for exactly this problem. The Horcrux in your scar. Harry sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the library for a moment. 500 years ago, he said. Someone knew. About the scar. About Voldemort. About all of it. Yes, said Hermione. He stopped. Started again. That's either the most reassuring thing I've ever heard or the most unsettling. Probably both, said Hermione. Probably both, Harry agreed. He looked back down at the notebook. We're going to need to test the mechanism before I use it. On a different Horcrux first, one of the others, to understand the process, and then you, said Hermione. And then me, said Harry. She nodded once, with the decisive quality of someone who had processed a large, frightening thing and arranged it into a workable plan. I'll start on the containment theory, she said. We'll need something to receive what the stone extracts. A vessel of some kind, something that can hold a soul fragment safely. I'll write to Loki, said Harry. He'll have thoughts on containment vessels. He always has thoughts, said Hermione, with the dry affection she developed for people she'd never met but felt she knew through their extensive effect on Harry. Extensively, Harry said, and the corner of his mouth was doing the small, satisfied thing. Outside the library windows, Hogwarts settled into a quiet early summer afternoon, the last weeks of term wrapping themselves around the school with the particular warmth of things that were ending and things that were about to change. In the hospital wing, Quirrell was breathing on his own for the first time in months. In Dumbledore's office, the golden instrument had stopped spinning and sat still. On the Gringotts ledger in the deepest vault, something had shifted in the record, a notation in the old script, a single line, appended in the 500-year-old margin: the confluence has found the stone. The work begins. Chapter 6, What Asgard Owes and What We Keep. The Bifrost opened over the palace courtyard at noon on the last day of June, and Harry stepped through it with his trunk and Alara's cage and the lead-lined case and the particular quality of someone returning to a place that was home in every way that mattered. Loki was already there. Not in the courtyard, in the archway above it, leaning against the stone with his arms folded and his green coat and the expression he wore when he'd been waiting longer than he'd intended but wasn't going to say so. He looked at Harry for a moment with the focused attention of someone checking that the inventory was complete, all parts present, nothing missing, and then he said, "You expelled a soul fragment from a living host." "Hello to you too," said Harry. "That's not, Harry, that's not something that has documented precedent in any magical tradition I'm aware of." "It does now," said Harry. He came up the steps and through the archway and Loki straightened and they looked at each other for a moment and then Loki put a hand briefly on the back of Harry's neck in the way he did when something had happened that warranted acknowledgement but didn't require elaboration. "Come inside," Loki said. Hela's been what?" "Manageable," said Loki, with the specific tone that meant the opposite. She was in the library. Standing at the window with her back to the door, which was her default position when she was waiting for something she didn't want to appear to be waiting for. She turned when Harry came in, and she looked at him the same way Loki had, the inventory check, the full assessment, the confirmation that everything was intact. "You're thinner," she said. "Hogwarts food is excellent," said Harry. "I'm probably the same." "You're thinner," she repeated, with the absolute conviction of someone who had measured him against a specific mental reference point and found a discrepancy. "Sit down. I've had food sent. I just got here." "Sit down and eat," she said, in the tone that was not negotiable. Harry sat down. The food arrived, Asgardian, rich, the specific dishes that had been his favorites since childhood, which he recognized as intentional and said nothing about because saying something about it would make it awkward and there was nothing awkward about being known. He ate and Hela sat across from him and Loki leaned against the bookshelf and they talked, not about the chamber, not yet, but about the year, the classes, Hermione, Draco, McGonagall's precision and Snape's layers and Flitwick's genuine expertise, Quirrell's eventual unmasking and Dumbledore's careful watch. Harry told it in order, and they listened, and neither of them interrupted except when the information required clarification, which was how you knew they were taking it seriously rather than simply tolerating the telling. When he got to the chamber, he told it the same way, straight, in sequence, without performance. Hela's expression during the account of the physical confrontation was the controlled version of something that in a lesser person would have been visible fury, but she held it and let him finish. "You held your ground," she said, when he described letting Quirrell reach him. "You didn't retreat." "Retreating would have let him reset the engagement," Harry said. "The contact was the resolution. I needed him to make it." "You knew that before it happened." "I thought it before it happened," he said. "I confirmed it when the stone pulsed." He paused. "The stone understood what needed to happen faster than I did. It was collaborative." Hela looked at the lead-lined case he'd set on the table. "It's in there." "Yes. And you haven't used it." "I've been thinking about it," he said. "About what Hermione found in the vault catalog. The extraction mechanism." He looked at her directly. "About the Horcrux in my scar." A silence in the room. "Not the heavy kind. The kind that came before significant things." Dumbledore told you, Loki said. He confirmed a theory I'd already built, said Harry. I've felt something in the scar since I was old enough to identify magical frequencies. I thought it was residual, the scar's own energy. But it has a different signature. He touched the lightning bolt on his forehead. It's been part of my magical structure for 10 years. How long have you known? Said Loki. His voice was very controlled. Suspected since April, Harry said. Known since the chamber, when the fragments separated from Quirrell. I felt the shape of what a separation looked like, and I recognized it. The thing in my scar has the same shape. He looked at Loki. You already knew too, didn't you? A pause. I had a theory, said Loki. I've had it since you were 8. The frequency irregularity in your scar when you sleep, I measured it 3 times. I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain, and because being uncertain about something like that and saying it out loud would have changed things, Harry said. Yes. It doesn't change things, said Harry. I told Hermione the same thing. It's information. We deal with information. He looked at both of them. The extraction mechanism in the stone is designed for this specifically. We test it on another Horcrux first. Dumbledore has the diary, which is already damaged but still partially intact, and it should serve as a model. We understand the mechanism. Then we use it on me. We, said Hela. I assumed you'd both want to be there, Harry said. You assumed correctly, she said. And Hermione, he added. She's been doing the theoretical work. She deserves to be in the room. Loki looked at him. You trust her? Completely, said Harry, without hesitation. He paused, searching for the right word. She's the most honest person I've met at Hogwarts. No gap between what she thinks and what she says, which makes her occasionally difficult and consistently reliable. He paused again. She'd like to meet you, actually. She has 17 specific questions about Asgardian seer and the proto-linguistic structure of the Vault Catalog, and I'll write to her, said Loki immediately. I thought you might say that, said Harry. 3 days passed in the Asgardian way, long, golden, full, before Odin summoned them. The summons came through the official channel, a palace herald in full formal livery, arriving at the library door with a written message on the standard official parchment, requesting, which was the polite fiction Odin used when commanding felt too aggressive for the specific political moment, the presence of Loki Odinson, Hela Odin's daughter, and their ward Harry Potter in the throne room at the first bell of the afternoon. Harry read the summons over Loki's shoulder. He wants to see the stone, he said. Probably, said Loki. And to assess what happened at Hogwarts. And to decide how to formally respond to Dumbledore. He handed the parchment back. And to have the conversation we've all been avoiding since the Veatir assassin. That conversation was always going to happen, said Hela, from her chair. We've just been choosing the timing. Today is apparently the timing, said Loki, dry as parchment. Harry went to his room and changed into the formal Asgardian wear that Hela had commissioned for him 2 years ago, dark, clean, silver at the collar and cuffs, the clothes of someone who belonged here rather than someone visiting. He put the jade disc inside the collar where it wasn't visible. He put the knife at his left wrist and the wand holster at his right. He looked at himself in the mirror for approximately 1 second and went back to the sitting room. Loki looked at him. Ready? Were you going to tell me something reassuring? Harry said. I was thinking about it, Loki said. I decided it would be condescending. Good, said Harry. Let's go. The throne room of Asgard was the kind of space that had been designed specifically to produce a particular response in the people who entered it, and it worked because it had been doing it for thousands of years and had refined the technique. The gold, the height, the distant ceiling, the specific quality of the light that came through the high windows and fell at the exact angle required to make the throne seem both warm and unreachable. Harry walked the length of it between Loki and Hela, and his footsteps were steady and his posture was what Hela had been drilling into him since age 7, present and grounded, the physicality of someone who knew where they were and was fine with it. The All-Father was on the throne with the Gungnir across his knees. He looked older today than he usually appeared, or perhaps that was the room. Odin had a way of wearing different amounts of his age depending on what the moment required, and today he was wearing most of it. His eye moved over all three of them and settled on Harry. "Harry Potter," he said. "All-Father," said Harry. "I hear you've had an eventful year." "Moderately," said Harry. "A soul fragment attempted to steal a magical artifact and use it to restore a corporeal form. I prevented that and returned the artifact to its owner. The fragment retreated. It will regroup." He paused. "Is that the summary you wanted or would you prefer the longer version?" Something in the corner of Odin's mouth moved. "You have your brother's gift for compression," he said, to Loki. "He has his own gifts," said Loki. "I've merely given them frameworks." Odin looked at Harry for a moment. "You held the Philosopher's Stone." "Yes. And it worked as designed." "As designed by whom?" said Harry. A pause. The quality of the room shifted, barely, but Harry felt it, the way the air changes before weather arrives. "By the people who built the vault at Gringotts," Odin said. "You know about the vault," said Harry. "I know about the vault," said Odin. "How long?" "Since before you were born," the All-Father said. He set the Gungnir across his knees at a different angle and looked at Harry with the full weight of one eye that had traded the other for the specific kind of wisdom that came from seeing too much. "Sit down, Harry Potter. This is a long conversation." There were no chairs. Odin gestured and there were chairs, 3 of them, arranged in front of the steps that led to the throne, not below them but beside them, which was a deliberate choice of geometry that Harry registered immediately. They sat. The vault, Odin said, was built by a council of practitioners from 6 realms. Working together, which they had not done before and have not done since. They pooled their knowledge and their power over a period of 7 years and they built a thing designed to last for a specific length of time. He paused. 500 years. "Until I arrived," said Harry. "Until the confluence arrived," Odin said. "In whatever form it took." His eye moved to Harry's face. "That it took your form, specifically, that was not something the council controlled. The confluence is not directed. It arises where the conditions allow. They built the vault and the stone and the mechanism and trusted that when the time came, whoever arrived to claim them would be the right person," said Harry. "Ready," Odin said. "Ready, not right. The distinction matters." "Why did they build it?" said Loki. He was very still in his chair, with the particular stillness that meant he was hearing something he'd suspected and was confirming against his own analysis. "The vault. The mechanism. All of it. Because the last confluence reshaped 3 realms permanently," Odin said. "The practitioners who studied it, some of them Asgardian, some Vanir, some from realms that no longer exist, concluded that the reshaping had been unguided. Raw. The confluence had arisen and done what confluences do when they have no context. No framework for understanding what they are." He looked at Harry. "They built the vault to ensure that when it happened again, the confluence would arrive in the world with resources. With knowledge. With something that could tell it what it was. And with a mechanism for the Horcrux," Harry said. A pause. "They did not use that word," Odin said. "They didn't have a specific target. They knew that a confluence arising in a world that had magical conflict, which all worlds do, would likely have something foreign attached to it. Something that would try to use the power rather than let it be used by its proper nature." He paused. "The stone's extraction mechanism is designed for exactly that, removing what does not belong from a confluence without harming the confluence itself." The room was very quiet. "You knew," said Hela. Her voice was flat and even and contained a great deal underneath it. You knew what he was before we brought him here. Before the Bifrost. You knew the vault existed and you knew what it was for and you knew a confluence was coming. Yes, said Odin. And the people at Privet Drive, she said. You knew about the cupboard. A silence of a different kind. Odin looked at Hela, and whatever he saw in her face, the controlled fury, the certainty of someone who had been in Niflheim long enough to know every form darkness could take, made him hold the silence for a moment before answering. I did not arrange it, he said. I was aware of it. I made a calculation that intervening directly, would have given him a different upbringing, Hela said. And you wanted the confluence to develop under specific conditions. Hardship included. Hela, said Loki quietly. No, she said, and her voice had not risen but the temperature in the room had dropped by several degrees in a way that was not metaphorical. He sat in a cupboard for how long? He apologized for needing a bed. And you sat on your throne and knew and calculated. She looked at Odin with her green eyes that were not like Harry's green, that were the green of things that grew in places where light was negotiated rather than given. Explain the calculation to me, All-Father. I'd like to hear it. Odin looked at his daughter for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even. The confluence required a specific kind of development. Power arising in comfort and plenty has a different character from power that has had to earn itself. The old writings on confluences were consistent on this point. The ones that arose and protected, celebrated children tended to assume their own centrality. Tended toward arrogance, said Harry. Odin looked at him. Yes. And what arose in neglected, locked-in cupboards children, Harry said, tends toward, what? Humility. Gratitude. The correct amount of smallness. Perspective, Odin said. Perspective, Harry repeated. He held the word up and examined it from all sides. You wanted the confluence to develop perspective. By making sure it grew up knowing it wasn't wanted. I wanted the confluence to develop. You can call me Harry, Harry said. You've been calling me Harry Potter all morning. Drop the surname. It's more honest. Odin stopped. You wanted me, Harry said, to grow up knowing I wasn't wanted, because you thought that would make me develop a specific kind of character. And then when Loki and Hela found me anyway, because you knew they would, I assume, because you know most things in advance, you let it happen because it fit the larger design. He paused. The question I have is whether the design was about making me useful or about making me safe. Those aren't mutually exclusive, said Odin. In your vocabulary they're generally synonyms, said Harry. Useful and safe meaning, controlled. Operating within Asgard's preferred parameters. The confluence as a resource rather than a person. The throne room was completely silent. Loki was very still. Hela had the particular quality of someone who was holding a significant amount of force in reserve and was deciding how long to hold it. Odin looked at Harry without expression. I was not wrong, the All-Father said, to be concerned about what an unguided confluence could do. No, Harry said. You weren't wrong about that. And I was not wrong to ensure that the people who found you were people I trusted to guide rather than suppress. You trusted Loki and Hela, said Harry, and the thing in his voice was not accusation, not yet, but something building toward a specific question. Despite exiling one of them and restricting the other. You trusted them to raise me but not to govern Asgard's interests in other matters. Those are different kinds of trust, Odin said. Are they? Harry said. Or did you trust them because you knew what they were, people who had been put in small boxes and had decided not to stay there, and you thought that kind of trust, extended toward a child who needed it, would produce exactly the thing it produced? Which is, he looked at his hands for a moment. Someone who knows how to be powerful without needing permission for it. A pause that went on long enough to be significant. Yes, Odin said quietly. Partially. And the other part? Odin looked at Harry with his single ancient eye, and the warmth that wasn't warmth and the distance that wasn't distance, and the weight of someone who had governed a great deal for a very long time and had learned to make large, cold calculations about individual lives. The other part, he said, is that they needed you too. Silence. They were alone, Odin said. Both of them. In their different ways. Hela, in her exile, governing death with a thoroughness that left room for nothing else. Loki, in his studies, building frameworks for things no one else bothered to understand. He paused. Two brilliant, isolated people who had decided that needing things was a vulnerability they couldn't afford. Who needed, specifically, to love something that needed them back. He looked at Harry steadily. I could not have given them that. I tried. I was not, a pause that cost him something. I was not sufficient to the task. The room held this. Loki was looking at Odin with an expression that Harry had never seen on his face before. It was not soft. It was the opposite of soft, actually. It was what you looked like when the thing you'd been angry about for 500 years revealed a seam of something that complicated the anger without resolving it. Hela looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, which for Hela was approximately the equivalent of crying. Harry sat with the information. He turned it over and looked at all the sides of it, the manipulation, the calculation, the cold governance of individual lives for larger purposes, and also, underneath that, the thing Odin had just said about isolation and need, which was either the most cynical thing he'd ever heard or, possibly, the most honest. I'm not your instrument, Harry said finally. Whatever the confluence is, whatever it can do, I'm not a resource or a plan. I'm a person who happened to become something large, and the largeness doesn't change the personhood. Are we clear on that? Yes, said Odin. And whatever comes next, whatever happens with Voldemort's remaining Horcruxes, with the Vaetir, with the wizarding world and its expectations, those are my choices to make. With Loki and Hela, who are my family, and with Hermione, who is my friend, and with information rather than destiny. He paused. I don't operate according to a prophecy or a design. I operate according to what I understand and what I decide. That, said Odin, is exactly what I hoped you'd say. Harry looked at him for a long moment. That doesn't mean I forgive you for the cupboard. I know, said Odin. Or for the calculation. I know. But I understand it, Harry said. Which is not the same thing, and you should be aware of the difference. Odin, the All-Father, who had ruled the 9 realms for thousands of years and had sat on his throne through the rises and falls of empires and had traded one eye for specific wisdom and had made more large, cold calculations than any living thing should have to, looked at the 11-year-old in front of him. Yes, he said. I am. They left the throne room in the early afternoon, walking back through the palace corridors in the particular quiet that followed conversations of significant weight. Harry walked between Loki and Hela and none of them spoke for a while, which was the luxury of people who had been living in the same space long enough that silence was its own language. It was Hela who spoke first. He's not wrong, she said. About what we needed. I know, said Loki. I'm not forgiving him for it, she said. But he's not wrong. Both things can be true, said Harry. She looked at him sideways. Yes, she said. They can. They walked past the armory, past the secondary library wing, past the hall where the murals of old battles covered the walls in gold and umber. Harry had walked this route so many times it existed in his body the way home routes do, automatic, unthinking, the muscle memory of belonging somewhere. The Horcrux in the scar, said Loki. I've been thinking about the extraction mechanism. So have I, said Harry. And Hermione's theoretical work on the containment vessel. She's been writing to me since I got back, said Harry. Her last letter was 14 pages. I like her, said Loki, with the warmth he reserved for people who did thorough research. She'd be devastated to hear you say that, said Harry. In the best way. The mechanism needs to be tested before we use it on you, Loki said. Dumbledore has the diary, I've already written to him, said Harry. He's agreed. He'll send it to Asgard. He was, surprisingly cooperative. He's afraid of what you are, said Hela. Not of you, specifically. Of what happens if he mismanages you. Probably, said Harry. He's also genuinely trying to do right by a very complicated situation with incomplete information and a consistent blind spot about the difference between good intentions and good outcomes. That's a generous reading, said Loki. I can afford to be generous, said Harry. I have better information than he does and I'm not afraid of him. He paused. Generosity from strength reads differently than generosity from deference. Loki looked at him. Did I teach you that? Hela did, said Harry. You taught me the theory. She taught me to mean it. That sounds right, said Loki, slightly dry. The diary arrived from Dumbledore's office 4 days later, brought through by Heimdall, who received it at the Bifrost terminus with the particular expression he reserved for objects that deserved careful handling. It was in a sealed container, lead-lined like Harry's. Dumbledore had thought to do that, which was, Harry noted, the kind of practical intelligence that made him genuinely formidable regardless of his blind spots. They set it up in the large workroom off the main library, a space Loki used for experiments that required room and that had the relevant shielding already built into the walls, added 3 centuries ago after something he wouldn't specify in detail. Harry set the stone on the workbench. It sat there looking ordinary and impossible in equal measure. He looked at it for a moment and then looked at Loki and Hela standing at the perimeter of the workspace, both of them with the quality of people who were not going to interfere unless something went significantly wrong and were prepared for that possibility. The mechanism, as Hermione translated it, Harry said, is, the boundary substance in motion, at the resonance of the confluence, inverts the division and passes the contained back through itself. He picked up the stone. Which means I need to, move it. Vibrate it at the specific frequency of my own magic. And then apply it to the Horcrux. He paused. And whatever fragment of soul is in the diary gets passed back through the stone's boundary. Extracted. To where, said Loki. That's the containment question, said Harry. Hermione's theory is that a soul fragment extracted cleanly, without being destroyed, exists in a suspended state. Between. It needs a vessel. He picked up the secondary container he'd had made, a small lead sphere, sealed, with the specific inscriptions Hermione had designed and Loki had refined. This should hold it. Should, said Hela. The alternative is destruction, said Harry. Which I'm not opposed to, eventually. But understanding the mechanism first is better methodology. He looked at her. I'm not going to use it on myself without testing it first. I'm careful. You flew a broom at 200 feet, Hermione already mentioned that, he said. Hela closed her mouth. But the corner of it moved. Harry picked up the diary and held it in one hand and the stone in the other and stood with both of them and felt, with the confluence, with the meeting place, with the point where all channels met and had opinions, the shape of what was in the diary. A fragment, much smaller and more damaged than the one that had been in Quirrell, curled around itself in the old leather like something that had been compressed over a long time. It had an anger to it that was out of proportion to its size, the anger of something that had been powerful and was now small and knew the difference. I see you, Harry thought, not unkindly. I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to move you. He let the stone resonate with his own magic, let the confluence frequency move through the stone's boundary substance, felt the stone warm in his hand, felt it begin to vibrate at the specific register of where things pass through, and applied it to the cover of the diary. The room went very quiet in the way that preceded large things. The diary's binding cracked, not physically but magically, the seam of the Horcrux becoming visible as a line of dark light that ran through the leather, the fragment responding to the resonance the way a knot responds to the specific tension required to loosen it rather than tighten it. Harry held the stone steady and held the frequency and waited, and the fragment, with the quality of something that had no remaining choice, came through. Not dramatically. Not with a scream or a flash. Like something returning to the state it should have been in all along, liquid becoming vapor, the change of state that was simply the correct direction given enough heat. The lead sphere pulled it in. Sealed. Harry felt the click of it, the containment taking, the sphere's inscriptions activating, Hermione's careful theoretical work becoming functional reality. He set both objects down on the bench and stepped back. Loki let out a breath. "That worked," said Hela. "Yes," said Harry. "Exactly as intended." "Yes." He looked at the sphere. "Next step is the diadem, the locket, the cup, the ring. Dumbledore has leads on most of them." "And then, you," said Loki. "Me," Harry agreed. "The scar." He touched it. "But that one we do here. In this room. With all three of us and Hermione." "Agreed," said Loki. "And not until we've run the mechanism 4 more times and understand every variable," said Harry. "I'm not rushing this one. It's mine and I'm doing it correctly." "Thorough," said Hela. "Good. I learned from both of you," he said. "Loki wants to understand everything before he commits. You want to commit fully when the time comes." He looked between them. "I do both." The summer settled into its particular Asgardian rhythm. Long days, golden light, training in the mornings and research in the afternoons and evenings in the library working through the vault catalogue with Loki, both of them building the picture piece by piece. The Vaetirs sent no one else. Harry was aware this meant they were reconsidering strategy rather than abandoning it, and he was spending a measured amount of time building his understanding of them, their specific fears, their genuine grievances, the parts of their worldview that were paranoid delusion and the parts that were legitimate concern. Loki had contacts in the scholarly networks that intersected with the Vaetir's outer edges, and he was quietly doing the same work from a different angle. Hermione's letters arrived every 4 days with the reliability of someone who had decided correspondence was a discipline and had added it to her schedule accordingly. They were long and dense and covered the containment vessel theory, the progressive Horcrux work, her own reading into the Proto-Asgardian linguistic tradition, and occasional observations about the wizarding world that she was viewing with increasing complexity now that she had Harry's framework for comparison. Her most recent letter had ended with, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Voldemort and the fear of the wrong thing. I think the entire history of dark magic in this tradition is the history of people being afraid of the wrong things. Death, primarily. But also, irrelevance. Being forgotten. Being small. What would happen if someone actually taught them what death was?" Harry had written back, "Hela would say that's not a teaching problem. It's a listening problem. People know what death is. They just don't want to know it." Hermione had replied in 2 hours with 4 pages of counterargument that he'd read with the particular pleasure of an argument that was making him think harder. Draco Malfoy's owl had arrived in July with a letter that was short and careful and had clearly been revised several times. The parchment had the faint indentation pattern of someone who had written and crossed out and rewritten. It said, essentially, "I've been thinking about what you said on the train. About honest conversations. I don't think I've had many of those. I'd like to try having more of them with someone who doesn't immediately want something from me." Harry had written back, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me. Good start." He was building his understanding of Draco the same way he built his understanding of everything, carefully, from observation, without assuming the surface was the full picture. What he'd found underneath the performance was a person whose intelligence was genuine and whose uncertainty about who he was supposed to be had been resolved, by his family, in the direction of what they needed rather than what he was. That was a kind of small box, Harry thought. Different material from his, but the same basic architecture. On the last evening of July, his birthday, which Hela had begun observing with the particular dedication of someone who considered the acknowledgement of significant dates a form of respect for existence itself, they were in the library after dinner with the candles burning low and Alara asleep on her perch in the corner and the research spread across the table and Asgard's summer gold outside the window going slowly to amber. Harry was 12 now. He noted this without particular ceremony. 12 in Midgardian years, which in Asgardian context was essentially newborn, which put an interesting lens on everything he'd managed to do. Loki poured 3 cups of something warm and handed 2 of them across the table and sat back with the expression he wore when something had resolved into a shape he could work with. "The Horcrux work will take another year," he said. "The diadem's location is the current open question. Dumbledore has a lead, but it requires verification." "I know where it is," said Harry. Loki stopped. "There's a room at Hogwarts," Harry said. "I found it in April. A room that appears only when you need it, specifically when you need to hide something. It's full of centuries of things people have hidden there. The diadem is in it." He paused. "I didn't take it then because I wasn't ready to use the stone's mechanism and I didn't want to disturb it before I was ready." "You've known since April," said Loki. "I tell you things in the right order," said Harry. "You taught me that." A pause. Then Loki exhaled and looked at Hela, who looked like she was experiencing several emotions and had reached the same conclusion about all of them, which was that they could be expressed later. "The Veatir," said Harry. "I want to meet with them. Not a confrontation, a meeting. I want to understand their position from the inside." "They sent an assassin," said Hela. "I know. That's what makes meeting them interesting. They've tried force and it didn't work, so they're in a position where talking is actually their best remaining option. Which means they'll do it." He looked at them both. "But I want to do it here. In Asgard, on ground we control, with full information about what they want." "That's going to require significant preparation," said Loki. "I know," said Harry. "That's what this year is for." "And Hogwarts," said Hela. "You're going back." "Yes," he said. "Hermione is there. The diadem is there. Whatever Dumbledore is building toward Voldemort's defeat is centered there, and I need to be inside it rather than adjacent to it." He paused. "And it's my world, partly. It's where I came from. I'm not done understanding it." Hela looked at him for a long moment. "You're not afraid of any of this," she said. "I'm aware of all of it," he said. "Which is better than afraid or unafraid. Aware means I'm paying attention." She looked at Loki. Loki looked at Harry with the expression he wore when something had exceeded an already high expectation, not surprised, because he'd learned to expect the highest thing, but specifically and quietly satisfied. "You're going to be extraordinary," he said. "I'm already extraordinary," Harry said. "That was never the question." He picked up his cup. "The question is what I do with it." "And," said Hela. Harry looked at the amber light outside the window, at Asgard stretched out below it, the palace and the bridge and the waterfall pouring off the edge of the world into forever, and then at the room around him, the library and the fireplace and the table covered in research and these 2 people who had pulled him out of a cupboard and given him all of this. The stone was in the lead case on the secondary shelf, warm and patient. The Horcrux work waited. The Veatir waited. The wizarding world waited, with its expectations and its grief and its complicated, specific version of magic that was part of what he was. Voldemort's remaining fragments waited, diminished and planning. All of it waited. Harry picked up his cup and looked at both of them and said, with the absolute and unhurried certainty of someone who had decided, at 12 years old, on a clear July evening in Asgard, exactly what kind of thing they were going to be, something worth the wait. Outside, the Bifrost shimmered at the edge of the world, and the stars beyond it were not points of light but whole burning things with weight and presence, and Harry had known for 6 years that the cosmos was not something that happened to you but something you were made of, and he sat in the library with the people who had taught him that and felt, with complete and unperformed certainty, the particular fullness of a life that had been chosen rather than assigned. In Gringotts, in the deepest vault, in the margin of the 500-year-old ledger, the final notation that had appeared the night Harry held the stone read, in the old language that had no surviving speakers except him, the confluence knows itself. The work continues. The rest is his. And below it, in handwriting that matched no hand currently living, a single additional line that had not been there when Harry had last visited the vault, that had appeared in the days since, written in the same ink and the same hand as everything else, as though whoever had written it 500 years ago had always known when to add it. Well done.